She was 12 years old, barefoot on burning asphalt, and she walked straight through a wall of idling Harleys like she already knew she was going to die anyway. The white van across the lot hadn't moved in 40 minutes. The driver hadn't looked up from his phone once, and the little girl's palm, pressed flat against a scorching exhaust pipe, didn't even flinch. She looked at Grim Callahan with eyes he recognized, eyes that had already decided the world wasn't going to save them. He'd seen that look before, in another desert, on children he couldn't reach in time. This is the story of what happens when broken men refuse to walk away twice. Stay until the end, hit that like button, and drop your city in the comments. I want to know where in the world you're watching this from tonight. The truck stop didn't have a name on the sign anymore, just a sun-bleached rectangle of metal bolted above the door where letters used to be. The adhesive outlines of whatever words had once promised travelers something: food, fuel, rest, long since cooked off by a decade of Arizona summers. The pump still worked. The coffee inside was still terrible. And the parking lot, at 11:14 on a Tuesday night in late October, was exactly the kind of place the world forgot to watch. Grim Callahan pulled his '09 Road King off the highway with the particular exhaustion that lives not in muscles, but somewhere behind the sternum. A weight that doesn't belong to one night, but to 20 years of nights stacked on top of each other. He was 44 years old. His left knee had been reconstructed twice. The scar running from his right cheekbone to the hinge of his jaw had stopped bothering him around 2019, the way old shrapnel wounds eventually stop announcing themselves, and simply become part of the geography of a man's face. He wore a black helmet he always pulled off too fast, and when he did it now, the cold desert air hit the sweat on his scalp, and he just sat there for a moment on the idling engine, eyes closed, breathing. 11 motorcycles pulled in behind him, one at a time, the sound of them folding down from highway thunder into something lower and more patient, like a storm that hadn't decided yet whether to break. The Iron Revenants. 8 men and 3 women, ages ranging from 31 to 62, all of them carrying the specific posture of people who had learned a long time ago how to take up space without apology. Their cuts, the leather vests that meant something more than fashion and something less than law, were worn soft and dark at the edges. The back patches bore a cracked iron shield split by a single vertical sword, and beneath it, in letters that had been hand-stitched by a woman named Rosie Vasquez in a garage outside Tucson 14 years ago, Iron Revenants. Underneath that, smaller, we came home wrong. Grim hadn't written that last line. That had been Decker's idea. Sergeant First Class Marcus Decker Delaney, retired, who'd done 3 rotations in Helmand Province and come back with both hands intact and something essential in his chest simply gone. Decker was the one who'd understood, before any of them had the language for it, that the club wasn't about brotherhood in the romantic sense. It was about survival in the most literal one. You put broken people together and you gave them a reason to get up and put on boots in the morning. That was the whole theology of it, no more than that. Decker pulled up beside him now and killed his engine. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They'd ridden from Flagstaff that afternoon, the long way around, because 2 of the newer members, a woman named Carver and a man named Teo, were still in the process of learning that the long way around was sometimes the only way that kept a person sane. Decker pulled off his gloves and looked out at the parking lot the way a former soldier always looks at a new space. Exits first, then threats, then the ordinary things arranged in between. There were 11 vehicles in the lot besides their bikes. A silver Peterbilt cab parked lengthwise across the far end. 3 personal cars with out-of-state plates. A battered F-150 with a cracked windshield and a cardboard Suns bumper sticker so old it had faded to almost nothing. A white cargo van, panel-sided, no rear windows, license plate caked with dried road mud on the bottom half. Parked sideways at the edge of the lot, away from the lights, engine off, no movement inside. Grim looked at it for maybe 3 seconds before he looked away. His brain filed it in the back of the drawer marked, "Not your problem. Not tonight. You are 44 years old and your knee hurts and you have 110 miles to go before you sleep." He swung off the Road King and stretched his back and heard the familiar cartilage click that had been doing that since Kandahar, and heard Decker behind him say, "Coffee is going to be terrible. It's always terrible. I'm getting 2 cups anyway." I know you are. They went inside. The diner attached to the truck stop was the kind of place that hadn't been renovated since the 90s and wore that fact with a kind of accidental dignity. Vinyl booths the color of old mustard, a counter with spinning stools, half of which no longer spun, a pie case with 3 slices of something that might have been apple and might have been peach and had been in there long enough that the crust had gone slightly translucent. Behind the counter, a woman in her mid-50s with dyed black hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain moved with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing this particular job so long her body ran it on autopilot while her mind went somewhere else entirely. Her name tag said Cheryl. She looked at the 11 bikers coming through the door and didn't react at all, which told Grim she'd been working this stop a long time and had seen everything at least once. "All of you?" she said. "If you've got room," Grim said. "I've got room," she said, already pulling mugs. "You want menus or you just want coffee and whatever's fast?" "Whatever's fast," Decker said, "and yes to the coffee, all of us." They settled into the back booths, the revenants doing what they always did in unfamiliar spaces, spreading out just enough to see all the angles without making it theatrical about it. It was force of habit. It had kept several of them alive at various points, and it was now simply how they arranged themselves in the world, the way some people always sit with their backs to walls, and some people always check behind shower curtains, and some people sleep with one ear half open, even 20 years after the thing that caused it. Grim took the booth end closest to the window, not because he'd made a decision about it, just because his body did it automatically, and he'd long since stopped arguing with his body about that particular reflex. Through the window, the white van was still there. Still dark. Still angled away from the sodium lights. He looked at his coffee instead. It was 11:22 p.m. At 11:31, the door opened and a child walked in. She was small, maybe 4 to 6, maybe a little under, dark hair tangled and unwashed, hanging past her shoulders. Wearing a t-shirt 2 sizes too large that had a sun-faded cartoon on the front that Grim couldn't make out from across the room, and cotton shorts despite the fact that the desert night outside was 51 degrees. Her feet were bare. The soles of them were dirty in the specific way that meant she'd been barefoot on rough ground for longer than an hour, longer than a day probably. She walked through the door with a particular kind of stillness, not the stillness of a child who is calm, but the stillness of a child who has learned to make herself very small and very quiet, because those are the 2 things that have kept her alive. Cheryl looked up from behind the counter. "Honey." The girl didn't look at Cheryl. She was looking at the window, looking out at the lot. Her eyes moved in the way that eyes move when they are counting something, measuring something, calculating something that has nothing to do with the question of whether to order pie. Then she looked at Grim. He didn't know why she picked him. Maybe it was something about how he was sitting, turned slightly toward the window, the same direction she'd been looking. Maybe it was something about the cut. Maybe it was something about the scar on his face that communicated, in whatever language desperate children read, that this was a man who had been in dangerous places before and had come out the other side of them. Or maybe there was no logic to it at all, and she'd simply looked around the room, and his was the face that looked back at her without flinching. She walked toward him. She walked between the other booths and past Carver, who straightened, and past Teo, who put down his coffee cup, and past Decker, who said nothing but went very still in the way Decker went still when something had just reorganized itself in his assessment of a situation. She walked until she was standing beside Grim's booth, and she looked at him, and she didn't say anything for a long moment. "You okay?" Grim said. She didn't answer that. What she did was turn and walk back outside. Grim looked at Decker. Decker looked at the door the girl had just walked back through. Something passed between them that didn't require language. It rarely did anymore, after this many years. And Grim slid out of the booth and followed her. She was in the parking lot, standing beside his Road King, which was parked at the near end of the row of bikes, the exhaust pipes still warm from the ride. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the van. And then, with the deliberate intention of someone performing an act they have decided to perform regardless of the pain involved, she reached down and pressed the flat of her right palm against the top of the rear exhaust pipe. Grim moved fast. "Hey! Hey!" He grabbed her wrist and pulled her hand away, and she let him. Didn't resist, just looked up at him with those eyes. The eyes he hadn't been able to name at first but could name now. He'd seen that exact calibration of stillness in children in a village outside Kandahar in 2009. Children who'd understood that the adults around them were playing a game with very bad stakes, and that survival meant learning to be furniture. Her palm was blistered. The burn was real, immediate, the skin already lifting at the edges. She hadn't even made a sound. "Why did you do that?" Grim said. It came out flat because he already suspected he knew. She didn't answer him. She crouched down, touched one finger to the fresh blood already beating at the edge of the burn blister, and before he could process what she was doing, she wrote 3 letters across the curved surface of his fuel tank. Deliberate, careful. The letters of someone who'd thought about this, planned this, saved this up like a last coin. SOS. Grim stood up slowly. His knee protested. He didn't feel it. He looked at the van. 40, maybe 50 yards. Dark. Panel sides. No rear windows. License plate obscured. Engine off for, he checked his watch, at least 30 minutes by now, probably more. Parked at an angle that put the rear doors facing away from the diner's sightlines. He'd registered all of that without understanding what he was registering. His brain had been filing the data without letting it complete the sentence. He let it complete the sentence now. He looked down at the girl. "How many?" he said. She looked up at him. She held up both hands, fingers spread, then folded all of them down and held up 4 more. 14. Then she shook her head and held up 1 more finger, then hesitated and added another. He wasn't sure of the exact number. She wasn't sure either. Too many to count exactly when you were hiding in the dark, and terrified and counting by sound and body heat, and the small animal sounds of other children trying not to make noise. "You got out," Grim said. A small nod. "How?" She touched the back of her heel. A cut there, mostly dried, a slice that had gone through the skin. She mimed something small with her fingers. A bolt, a latch, something that had given way. "Is there anyone else who got out?" She shook her head. "Just her." "Okay," Grim said. He said it very quietly. Not to her exactly. More to the space between the thing he had been 20 minutes ago and the thing he was in the process of becoming. "Okay." He walked her back inside with his hand on her shoulder. Not gripping, just present, the way you move a frightened thing without adding to its fear. And he came through the door and looked at Decker and said 2 words, at a volume only the table could hear. "We have a situation." The Revenants were good at situations. That was not a brag. It was the specific outcome of having been built, most of them, by institutions that trained people to function under pressure, then returned those people to a civilian world that had no container for what they'd become. The club had been that container. And part of what the container held was this. When someone at this table said, "We have a situation," everyone at this table understood what that meant without requiring a PowerPoint presentation about it. Decker leaned forward. The others, Carver, Teo, a broad-shouldered man named Priest, who had never in 14 years of club membership been addressed by any other name, a red-haired woman named Lana, who ran a motorcycle repair shop outside Phoenix and had done 2 tours with the 82nd, and the others, they all shifted, almost imperceptibly, toward the center of the table. "How bad?" Decker said. "Van in the lot. White cargo, no windows. There are children in it. At minimum 14, she thinks more. She got out through a latch in the floor. They don't know she's out yet." He paused. "Probably." Decker didn't say anything for 3 seconds. Then, "Handlers?" "I'm assuming at least 2 in the van. I can't see if anyone's watching from outside." "She give you anything else?" "No, she's—" Grim looked at the girl who was sitting at the end of the booth now, her burned hand wrapped in a paper napkin Cheryl had brought over without being asked, staring at the table with the expression of someone who has used up most of what they had and is now operating on whatever comes after that. "She needs a minute," Priest said quietly. "You call it in?" "Yeah," Grim said. "I call it in. They mobilize. Response time out here is 45 minutes minimum, probably more. Anything going on inside that van in the next 45 minutes? Whatever that van is doing here, whether it's stopped for the night or waiting for a transfer. We don't have eyes on any of that, and we don't control any of it." "So we're not calling," Carver said. "I didn't say that." "You're not calling," she said again. Not an accusation, just a statement of what she was hearing. Grim looked at her. Not yet. There was a silence around the table, not an uncomfortable one. The particular silence of people who already know where this road goes and are taking a few seconds to decide if they're willing to drive it. Decker said, "We need eyes on that van." "Priest and Lana," Grim said, "casual. You're going back out to the bikes." Neither of them needed more than that. He looked at the girl. He crouched down to her eye level. Cost his knee something, but he did it, and said, "What's your name?" She hesitated. Then, barely audible, "Nadia." "Nadia. My name is Grim." He watched her process that, watched the small recalibration that happened when someone hears a name like that from a man with a face like his and realizes it is not a threat. "I need to ask you some things. You don't have to answer if you can't, but it would help me understand what we're dealing with, okay?" A small nod. "Are there people watching from outside the van, other than the ones inside?" A pause, then, "One, maybe. He walks, goes away, comes back." A perimeter guard running irregular patterns. "How often?" She held up 2 fingers on one hand and 4 on the other. 2 to 4 minutes. Irregular enough to be unpredictable. "How long have you been traveling in the van?" She looked at the ceiling, thinking, then held up 3 fingers. 3 days? A nod. "Do you know where you were before that?" Something shifted in her face. Not fear exactly. The look of someone touching a memory they've been trying not to touch. She said a word Grim didn't catch, then 2 more, and he realized she was not speaking English, was speaking something else. Dari, possibly, or a dialect near it. He'd heard enough of it in country to recognize the phoneme patterns, if not the meanings. She stopped herself and looked frustrated in the way someone looks when they've spent 3 days in an English language emergency and their brain keeps reverting to the language that is home. "It's okay," Grim said. "You don't have to." "My sister," she said in English, deliberate, precise. "She is in there." Grim held her gaze. "How old?" 8. He didn't look away from her. He didn't change his expression. He said, "We're going to get her out." He didn't know at that moment if that was true. It was the thing he said because it was the only thing to say, and because the alternative, saying, "I don't know," saying maybe, saying, "Let me make some calls and see what the process looks like," would have been a different kind of lie, a more cowardly one. He stood up and went to the counter. Cheryl was pretending to wipe it down and not listen to anything. Grim put his hands flat on the counter and said quietly, "That girl came in with a burn on her hand. I'm going to need a first aid kit if you've got one, a glass of water, and something she can eat. And I need you to understand that we are dealing with something in your parking lot that is going to be uncomfortable, and I need you to stay calm and not call anyone for the next 15 minutes. Cheryl stopped wiping the counter. She looked at him over the top of her reading glasses. Whatever she saw in his face, the scar, the cut, the particular flatness of a man who is not making a request but not quite issuing an order either, seemed to compute. She said, "That van's been there since 9:30. Grim went still. "You saw it come in?" "I see everything that comes into this lot. It's my lot." She held his gaze. "A man came in for coffee at 9:45, big, neck tattoos, paid cash, sat at the counter for 12 minutes and left. Didn't say anything weird, but he looked at the door twice while he was drinking." She paused. "The van didn't move when he left." "Okay," Grim said. "First aid kit's under the register," she said. "And I've got chicken soup in a can that I can heat up in 4 minutes. Thank you, Cheryl." She looked at him for one more beat. "You going to make sure those kids are okay?" Grim said. "That's what I'm working on." He went back to the table. The first aid kit went to Teo, who was a former combat medic, and moved to Nadia's side without ceremony, unwrapping the paper napkin from her hand with the brisk gentleness of someone who has dressed wounds in worse places under worse conditions. Nadia watched him work without flinching, which told Grim something about her pain threshold that made his chest tighten in a way he didn't want to examine right now. The door opened. Priest came back in first, followed 3 seconds later by Lana. They didn't look at each other. Priest went to the counter and ordered a coffee he didn't need. Lana came to the booth and sat down beside Carver and said, in a voice pitched for the table only, "2 in the van, at least." I could hear movement. Not panicked movement, controlled, like they're awake and waiting. She paused. And there's a second van. Grim looked up. Came in while we were outside. No lights, slow, parked at the back of the lot. I saw it in the reflection off the Peterbilt. It stopped before it reached the lights. She put her hands around her coffee mug. We've got a handoff, Decker said quietly. Timeline. If it's a transfer, Grim said, they're going to want to move before dawn. That gives us... He checked his watch. Maybe 4 hours, maybe less if they're running ahead of schedule. We can't hit 2 vehicles, Teo said. Not with 11 people, not without backup, not without knowing what's inside the second one. I know. So what are we doing? The table was quiet. Outside, the desert sat on the world like something that had no opinion about what happened underneath it. Nadia had been listening. She wasn't pretending not to. She looked up from her bandaged hand and looked at Grim and said, in the careful English of someone translating in real time, "There is a man, the big man. He has a phone. There is always a phone. When the phone stops..." She looked at her hand. "Everything is faster. They move fast when the phone stops." Grim stared at her. "There's someone they're waiting to hear from." She nodded. "And when they stop hearing from him, they move." Another nod. He looked at Decker. Decker's face did the thing it sometimes did when the tactical picture rearranged itself. A very small tightening around the eyes, the way a man looks when a chessboard shifts and he sees a move he hadn't seen before. A move that costs something, but opens something. "We need to know what's in that second van," Decker said. "I need someone to find the perimeter guard," Grim said. "Not engage. Just locate." Priest, from the counter without turning around. "Working on it." Grim looked at Nadia. She was 12 years old and she had pressed her hand against a burning exhaust pipe and written her own distress signal in her own blood because she had calculated in the terrifying arithmetic of survival that this was the most efficient way to communicate to a stranger that she needed help and that the stranger needed to move. She had not screamed. She had not run into the diner crying. She had identified the man who looked most capable of action, and she had made him look at her. He thought about a village outside Kandahar. He thought about a compound with a blue door and a sound he'd heard from inside it, and the order that had come down through the radio to hold position and the way holding position had felt at the time and every day since. He was not going to hold position. He leaned forward. The table leaned with him, not dramatically, just gravitationally, the way people lean when the person at the center has stopped deliberating and started deciding. He looked around at each of them, Decker, Teo, Carver, Lana, and through the window behind them, Priest still at the counter, and outside the 4 others who'd stayed with the bikes, who would need to be briefed in the next 10 minutes. "Here's what we're doing," Grim said. He laid it out in 40 seconds. Clean, quiet, no wasted words. Assign positions. Identify the guard's pattern. Get eyes on the second van. Create a distraction at the pumps. Mechanical, not confrontational. A bike with a fuel issue. Nothing that reads as threat. Use that window to get visual confirmation of what's in both vehicles before committing to anything. "And after we confirm?" Carver asked. "Then we decide what comes after." Grim. Decker said it like a single note struck on a guitar. Not a challenge. A question shaped like a name. They had been friends for 16 years. Decker knew every inflection. Grim looked at him. "You're already decided," Decker said. A pause. "Yeah." Decker nodded once. It was not agreement or disagreement. It was the nod of a man who has accepted a load he knew was coming. "Then you need to tell us what we're signing up for, not the recon, the whole thing." Grim looked at the table for a moment, then at Nadia, who was watching him with those hollow, still eyes that were not dead, but were operating a very long way from hope. Then back at Decker. "Those kids are getting out of that van tonight," he said. "That's what we're signing up for." No one spoke. The neon light above the pie case buzzed once, flickered, and held. Decker picked up his coffee mug, drank from it, set it back down. "Terrible coffee," he said. "Yeah," Grim said. "Okay," Decker said. "Let's go to work." They spread it out over the next 22 minutes the way the Revenants had always operated best. Without ceremony, without drama, in the specific low-frequency register of people who have learned that the difference between a decision and its execution is mostly a matter of breathing correctly. Teo finished bandaging Nadia's hand and spoke quietly to her in a combination of English and what turned out to be serviceable Dari. He'd spent 14 months in Helmand, different unit, same general education, and she confirmed things he passed back to Grimm in shorthand. At least 2 handlers inside the primary van. 1 perimeter walker with an irregular pattern, probably armed. The second van, still dark at the back of the lot, had arrived with 2 occupants that Lana had counted as silhouettes in the Peterbilt's reflection. Priest had finished his coffee and gone back out and come back in and said simply, "Guards running 6-minute rotations. Goes behind the Peterbilt, comes back around the east side of the lot, back to a position near the dumpsters. I can time it. Can you read the plates on the second van from the dumpster position?" "Partial. I'll try." Grimm had put 3 people on the bikes at the pump end of the lot, Carver and 2 others, running the legitimate fuel issue that gave them reason to be standing around and talking near the front of the lot, drawing the sightlines of anyone watching from the dark toward ordinary biker business and away from the east side where the work was actually happening. It was the kind of thing that only works if the people doing it are genuinely not nervous, and the revenants, to their various credits and damages, were largely past the category of nervous. What they had instead was a focused cellular alertness that looked from the outside like calm. Nadia was in the corner booth with a bowl of chicken soup she was eating with the methodical concentration of someone refueling rather than tasting. Cheryl had brought it out and set it in front of her without comment, and put a hand briefly on the back of her head and gone back behind the counter, and that was the entirety of that exchange, and it was somehow exactly right. Grimm stood at the window, not close enough to the glass to be obvious. His coffee had gone cold. He wasn't drinking it anymore. He was thinking about what Nadia had said, about the phone, about the signal that would tell the handlers inside the van that it was time to move. He was thinking about the second van and what its presence meant in the architecture of this operation. Transfer operations didn't send a second vehicle unless the first was too full to complete the route, or unless they were splitting the cargo to reduce the risk of a single-point loss. Either interpretation meant there were more children than one van could carry. Either interpretation meant the number in Nadia's count was probably low. He was thinking about a radio call in 2009 and about a compound with a blue door and about how the paperwork had read after. He was thinking about the thing he'd said to Nadia without knowing for certain if it was true. "We're going to get her out." He looked down at his right hand. There was a faint smear on his palm from where he'd reflexively touched the fuel tank after she'd written on it. The ghost of 3 letters in her blood, already mostly dried, still visible in the sodium light coming through the window. SOS. He closed his hand into a fist. Decker appeared at his elbow. He had a particular way of materializing that came from years of operating in environments where sudden movement got people killed. He arrived gradually, almost like weather. He stood beside Grimm and looked out at the lot. "Priest counted 4 heat signatures through the van windows," Decker said. "He's good at estimating. Not a scope, just..." He tapped his own forehead. 16 years of doing it in the field. He says minimum 14, probably more. Says the thermal profile's wrong for adults. All children. Grimm exhaled slowly. "Second van," Decker continued, "is running its engine now. Low idle, they're warming up." Grimm looked at him. "That's not a 4-hour timeline," Decker said. "That's a 40-minute timeline." Something tightened in Grimm's chest. Not fear. The thing adjacent to fear that sharpens instead of paralyzes. The thing the Army had spent a long time trying to manufacture in young men, and had succeeded in manufacturing in Grimm Callahan at significant personal cost to all parties involved. "Get everyone back in here," he said. "Now." They came in over the next 4 minutes. The 3 at the pumps drifted in pairs, casual, as if they'd finished a cigarette. Priest came in from the east side of the building. The 4 who'd stayed with the bikes, Webb, a quiet man who had been a door gunner, and Reyes, and the 2 newer members whose road names were still being sorted out, came in from the far end and took positions near the counter. 11 people distributed through a diner that was otherwise empty at 11:56 p.m., Cheryl standing behind the counter with her arms folded and the expression of someone who has decided where their loyalties are. "Second van is warming up," Grimm said. We're out of time for a soft approach. Here's the situation. He looked around the room. What's in that van are children. Nadia's sister is in that van. There are at least 14 of them, probably more. There are handlers inside, at least 2, probably armed. There is a perimeter guard running a 6-minute rotation who is armed. There is a second vehicle in this lot that tells us this operation is bigger than one van, and that right now, tonight, they are in the process of moving these kids to wherever they are going next. The room was still. I'm not calling for outside help yet, Grimm said, because the response time doesn't fit the timeline, and because I don't know enough about the organizational structure of what we're looking at to know who's safe to call. That's a calculation I'm making right now, and I could be wrong about it. He met Decker's eyes. I'm probably not wrong about it. What are you asking? Webb said. He asked it without inflection, not challenging, just precise. I'm asking you to stand in a parking lot in Arizona with me and make sure those kids don't go anywhere tonight, Grimm said. Beyond that, I don't know exactly what it looks like. We're going to find out. Webb nodded once and went back to drinking his coffee. Carver said, if the guard is armed and the handlers are armed. We're not going in loud, Grimm said. We're going in present. 11 people on motorcycles in a dark parking lot changes the math of the situation without a shot fired. That's the first move. He looked at her. You understand me. Carver understood him. Decker said, we need a diversion at the guard's rotation point. Pull him past the Peterbilt and hold him there. Lana and Teo, Grimm said. Lana nodded. Webb and Reyes, you're with me at the primary van. Everyone else bikes started and positioned at the lot entrance. You're not blocking it. You're visible. Lights on. You want them to see you. He paused. Make it look like what it is. 11 bikers who aren't going anywhere. And if they decide to push through anyway? Reyes asked. Grimm looked at him. Then we have a different conversation. The second van's engine was still idling. Nadia had put down the soup bowl and was watching them from the corner booth. She had the look of someone who has been rescued before in some provisional way. Picked up and moved and handed off and picked up again. And doesn't yet trust that this rescue is different. Grimm couldn't blame her. He had given her nothing yet that was different. He'd wrapped her hand and fed her soup and made a decision he hadn't finished making. He walked over to her. I need you to stay here, he said, with Cheryl. No matter what happens in the next few minutes, you do not come outside. Do you understand? She looked at the window, at the lot, at the van she had escaped from through a torn floor latch, at some cost to the heel of her foot and the entirety of her terror. Then at him. You will get her out, she said. Not a question this time. He held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Yeah, he said. He went outside. The cold hit him like a verdict. 51 degrees, true desert cold that has no humidity to soften it, just a clean, thin air that goes straight into the lungs and reminds the body that it is an animal operating in conditions that don't particularly care about its comfort. The parking lot smelled like gasoline and hot asphalt, and the distant sage that drifted off the open desert to the east. The sodium lights buzzed overhead, throwing everything in that particular orange-yellow that makes shadows look permanent. The white van was 38 yards away. The second van's engine had shifted. Not the low idle of a vehicle keeping warm. A slightly higher register. The register of a vehicle whose driver has put it in gear. Grimm raised one hand. Behind him, 11 Harleys turned over. The sound of them. That specific, unmistakable, deep-throated thunder that is both mechanical and somehow organic, like a herd of something enormous deciding to move, rolled across the parking lot and bounced off the diner wall and rose into the cold Arizona night like a declaration. The second van's brake lights came on. Grimm walked forward. Behind him, the Iron Revenant spread out across the lot, headlights flooding the whole space white, the sound of their engines filling everything. 11 people who had been broken by various wars and had chosen, in the wreckage of those various wars, to build something that could do this specific thing, on this specific night, in this specific empty truck stop on a highway the world had forgotten about. And were now doing it. He was 15 yards from the primary van when its side door opened. A man stepped out, big, neck tattoos. The man Cheryl had described. He was holding something at his side that he hadn't quite committed to raising yet, and he looked at Grimm and at the 11 motorcycles behind Grimm and at the headlights filling the lot, and his face went through several calculations very quickly. Grim stopped walking. He stood in the lot with the lights of his brotherhood behind him and looked at the man and did not say anything. He had learned a long time ago that sometimes the most powerful thing a person can say is nothing at all. Let the silence carry the weight. Let the other man hear it for what it is. The man looked at the van, at Grim, at the bikes. From the back of the lot, the second van's engine cut. It was 12:03 a.m. Everything that happened next was going to happen fast, and Grim knew it, and he looked back once, just once, at the diner window where a 12-year-old girl was watching him from behind dirty glass with her bandaged hand pressed flat against the surface, her breath fogging the pain, her eyes burning with something that was not yet hope, but was the thing that comes just before hope, the desperate last foothold of it, before a person either finds ground or falls. He turned back to face the man with the neck tattoos, and across the parking lot, somewhere behind the Peterbilt, something fell, hard, and the perimeter guard shouted once, and the night went from tension into something else entirely, something that had its own gravity now, pulling everything in one direction, no stopping it, no taking it back. And Grim Callahan, 44 years old, 2 reconstructed knees, a scar from cheekbone to jaw, 20 years of carrying a blue door in Kandahar that he hadn't been able to open in time, took one more step forward. The man with the neck tattoos had a name, though Grim would not learn it until much later, and by the time he learned it, the name would no longer matter in any practical sense. What mattered right now, in this parking lot at 12:03 a.m., was the object in the man's right hand, which he had still not raised, which told Grim something important about his psychology. That he was calculating rather than reacting, which meant he was trained rather than impulsive, which meant this was not his first operation, and he had protocols for situations that went sideways, and was currently running through those protocols in the 2 or 3 seconds of stillness that existed between the moment the night broke open and the moment everything committed to its direction. Grim had been in enough of those 2 or 3 second windows to know they were the most expensive real estate on Earth. He kept walking, slowly, hands open at his sides, not raised. Raising your hands means you've already conceded the frame of the interaction, means you've accepted that the other person has authority you do not. And Grim had no intention of accepting that. Hands open, visible, moving forward at a pace that was deliberate rather than aggressive. The pace of a man who has somewhere specific to be and has decided he is going there. The man said, "Stop." Grim stopped, 3 yards between them, close enough to read the sweat on the man's hairline despite the cold, close enough to see the make of what he was holding. Semi-automatic, compact frame, held down and slightly behind the thigh, the posture of someone who wants the option without having committed to the choice. Behind Grim, the Harleys held their idol. 11 engines, low and even, like a pulse. "This is private property," the man said. "Truck stop," Grim said. "Open to the public." "Move along." "I'm waiting on a friend." Grim let his eyes go past the man to the van, just for a half second, the way you glance at something without meaning to, then back. "You got a problem with that?" The man's jaw tightened. He was good. Whatever training he had, it was real training, and he was running the same math Grim was running. 11 motorcycles, 11 riders, a parking lot with no good cover on his side, a van behind him that he needed to keep closed, a second van in the back of the lot that had just gone quiet in a way that meant its occupants were also running math. "You need to leave," the man said. "That's a request or a fact?" "It's a fact." Grim tilted his head slightly. The way a man tilts his head when he's heard something that doesn't quite compute and he's taking a moment to examine it. "See, a fact is something that's already true. What you just said isn't true yet, so that makes it a request." He paused. "I'm going to decline." From the east side of the lot behind the Peterbilt, Lana's voice said something short and calm that Grim couldn't make out over the engines, and a different voice, the perimeter guard, said something sharper, and then there was the specific sound of a physical disagreement being resolved quickly and without ceremony. And then there was nothing. The man in front of Grim moved his eyes toward the sound for exactly 1 second. That was the second Grim needed. He stepped sideways and forward simultaneously, not toward the man but past him, cutting the angle, putting himself between the man and the van door, and he said, loudly enough for everyone in the lot to hear, "Webb!" Webb came off his bike in one motion. Reyes came off his. The man swung back, and Grimm was already too close for the gun to be useful in any way that didn't end several careers very badly, and the man understood this the way experienced people understand it, not with resignation, but with the specific fury of someone who has just watched a tactical situation invert and knows the window has closed. "Don't," Grimm said. One word, flat. The man looked at him. Behind him, Webb had his hand on the van's side door handle, not opening it yet, just there. "There are children in that van," Grimm said, volume low, just for the man. "I know that, you know that. Everyone in this lot knows that. What happens in the next 30 seconds is up to you. You can make it complicated or you can make it simple. I strongly recommend simple." The man's breathing had changed. Not panic, something colder than panic, the elevated chemistry of a person recalculating their position when the position has gotten significantly worse. He looked at the gun in his hand, at Grimm's face, at the 11 bikes, at the second van, dark and still in the back of the lot, offering nothing. He lowered the gun, not surrendering, repositioning. There was a difference, and Grimm knew it and filed it. "Webb," Grimm said. Webb opened the door. The smell hit first, sweat and fear and urine and something else underneath both of those. The particular biological distress signal that a large number of bodies in a sealed, warm space produce when those bodies are very frightened and have been frightened for a long time. It was a smell Grimm recognized from places he didn't name in casual conversation. He stepped up to the van door and looked inside. 14 children, as it turned out. 14, not 15, not 16. The number resolved itself in the first few seconds with a terrible precision, ranging in age from what looked like 6 or 7 up to maybe 15. Mostly girls, though not entirely. Dressed inadequately for the desert night, some of them with blankets that were too thin, some without anything. Their faces, when the parking lot light fell on them, were in various stages of the same condition Nadia's face had been. The hollowed-out stillness of people who have been in danger long enough that fear has used up its supply of expression and left something quieter and more terrible in its place. They looked at Grimm. Grimm looked back at them. He had a rule he'd constructed for himself after 2009, after the compound with the blue door, after the paperwork. The rule was, you do not let them see it on your face. Whatever it is that rises in your chest when you look at something that was done to people who didn't deserve it, you do not let that live on your face, because they don't need your emotion right now. They need your function. They need a person who can do the next thing. Whatever your face does with its grief, it does it later, privately, at whatever cost that extraction requires. He kept his face quiet. He said, into the van, in the calmest voice he had, "My name is Grimm. Nobody's going to hurt you. We're going to get you out." One of the older children, a girl maybe 14, said something in a language Grimm didn't have. Several of the others responded to her. She looked at Grimm and said in fragmented English, "How many you?" 11, Grimm said. She looked past him at the lot, counted the bikes, looked back. "Okay," she said. Not relief. Assessment. "Is there anyone hurt?" Grimm said. A pause. She translated. 2 children raised hands, not dramatically, just factually. Grimm turned. "Teo, medical in the van now." Then back to the girl. "I need to know how many people were driving this van tonight." 2, she said. 2 men inside, 1 outside. "The 1 outside is handled. The 2 inside, where are they?" She shook her head, pointed toward the front of the van. Closed, separate. The cab. The driver's cab was partitioned from the cargo area. Grimm looked at Webb. Webb nodded once and moved to the front of the van. Grimm looked at the man with the neck tattoos, who was still standing 3 feet away with the lowered gun and the expression of someone who has run out of moves but hasn't yet decided what to do with that information. "Decker," Grimm said. Decker appeared at his shoulder. He had a way of being exactly where he needed to be that Grimm had never fully interrogated because it had never failed him. "We've got 2 in the cab," Grimm said quietly. I heard. And a second vehicle in the back of the lot with at least 2 more. Also heard. I need to know what's in that second vehicle before I know what we're dealing with. Decker looked at the man with the neck tattoos, then at Grimm. He knows. Yeah. So we should talk to him. That's what I was thinking. The man heard this exchange and understood exactly what it meant, and his face did something complicated. Not fear, exactly. The recalibration of someone who had been operating under a specific set of assumptions about how this night would go, and was now processing the reality that those assumptions had not survived contact with 11 bikers in an Arizona truck stop. I'm not saying anything, the man said. Okay, Grimm said. He said it easily, the way you say okay when you mean several other things. Webb came back from the front of the van. 2 in the cab. Neither of them is moving fast right now. Reyes is there. Grimm nodded. Grimm. It was Decker again, closer now, pitched lower. We've got a problem. The way he said problem was the way Decker said problem when he meant the word in a very specific sense. Not a complication, not an obstacle, but a thing that had just reorganized the entire night into something more dangerous than what they'd walked into. Grimm looked at him. The second van, Decker said. It's not just a second van. A pause. Priest got the plates while you were at the door. He ran them through a contact. Decker's contacts were the specific archaeology of a career spent in places that required knowing people in agencies that did not advertise their existence. The van is registered to a logistics company out of Scottsdale. The company's been flagged, not publicly. Internally in a database that Priest's contact had to go 3 levels deep to access. He stopped. How deep? Grimm said. Deep enough that the flag has a federal signature. The parking lot felt colder than it had. The engines behind them went on idling. Someone's running protection, Grimm said. That's one reading. What's the other reading? Someone's running the operation. Decker held his gaze. From inside. Grimm stood with that for a moment, the architecture of it, the way it changed every calculation that had felt stable 30 seconds ago. The idea of calling for help, the idea of a clean handoff to authorities, the idea of a cavalry arriving from somewhere that was trustworthy. All of it was suddenly load-bearing on a foundation that might not exist. He looked at the man with the neck tattoos. The man said nothing, but something in his face, the very small relaxation of someone who has been waiting for the other person to understand the actual situation, told Grimm that Decker's reading was the right one. Get the kids into the diner, Grimm said. Tateo, all of them. Triage in there. Cheryl will help. He looked back at the man. You and I are going to have a conversation. I told you. I know what you told me. I'm going to give you a chance to revise that. He walked the man to the side of the building, away from the lot, away from the kids being helped out of the van by Lana and Carver and Webb, away from the diner window. Decker came with him. The man walked because the alternative involved 2 people who were not in a negotiating mood and a very cold stretch of Arizona desert. In the shadow of the building, Grimm put his back against the wall and looked at the man. Decker stood off to the side, arms loose, not threatening in any specific way, just present. Here's what I know, Grimm said. I know there's a federal signature on that second van's registration. I know that means someone with a badge has either looked the other way on this or is actively involved. I know you know this. I know you've been operating under the assumption that if anything went sideways, that federal connection was your safety net. He paused. I need you to understand that right now, at 12:09 in the morning, in this parking lot, that safety net doesn't mean anything to me. The only thing that means anything to me right now is those 14 kids and however many more are in that second van. The man said nothing. I'm not asking you to confess to anything, Grimm said. I'm not asking you to testify. I'm not interested in your life story. I want to know 2 things. How many in the second vehicle, and where are they going? The man looked at the sky. The stars over the Arizona desert, at this elevation, at this hour, were the kind of stars that looked like they were placed there by something with patience and indifference in equal measure. He looked at them for a while. Grimm waited. He was good at waiting. It was one of the few skills the Army had given him that translated cleanly into civilian life. 11, the man said finally. His voice had gone flat, like a decision had been made somewhere behind it, and the voice was just reporting the outcome. In the second van, younger. They got separated from the main group 3 days ago outside Nogales. Where's the main group? A pause. I don't know the full route. Where do you know to? The man looked at his hands. They were large hands, capable looking, the kind of hands that had done a variety of things over a life, not all of them voluntary. There's a ranch, he said, about 60 miles east-northeast, off the highway, no signage. You'd drive past it 100 times. He stopped. And? That's where they go to wait, before the next leg. He said the word leg like it tasted like something, like it was a word that had acquired weight over time that it wasn't supposed to carry. There are more kids there. I don't know how many. A lot. Grim looked at him for a long moment. How long have you been doing this? Grim said. It wasn't the question the man expected. He looked up. What? How long? A silence. 18 months. How'd you get into it? The man's jaw moved. That's not... I'm asking. Debt, the man said. One word, carrying everything behind it that one word can carry when it's the answer to how a person ended up in a parking lot in Arizona in the middle of the night watching children being helped out of a van they'd been locked in for 3 days. Grim nodded. He didn't say anything else about it. The man's road to this parking lot was its own story, and it was not the story Grim was in the middle of. The ranch, he said. Is it guarded? Yes. How many? I don't know exactly. Enough. He said it with a kind of exhausted honesty. More than you've got. Who runs it? The man shook his head, not refusing, genuinely not knowing. I know a name. A contact name. It's not a real name. Give it to me anyway. Valdez. That's all I've got. He calls, he gives coordinates, he sets times. I've never seen him. The federal connection, how does it work? I don't touch that. Above my level. All I know is when things have gotten close before, inspections, roadblocks, anything, there's been a call and the problem went away. He met Grim's eyes. That's all I know. I swear to you that's all I know. Grim believed him. Not because he was naive about what people concealed, but because the specific texture of what the man had just said, the dead tone, the one-word answers, the flat affect of a person who has gone past shame into some territory beyond it, had the particular quality of truth stripped of performance. He pushed off the wall. Decker. Decker stepped forward and took position without being told specifically what position to take, which was one of the things about Decker that Grim had never found a way to adequately express. Grim went back into the parking lot. The second van. Dark at the back of the lot. Still idling when he'd last checked, now silent. Its occupants had been running their own calculations for the past 8 minutes and had arrived at conclusions that Grim needed to know before he got within 20 yards of it. Priest was at the east end of the lot, leaning against a generator housing with a cigarette he wasn't smoking, the ember of it serving as a focal point for anyone looking his direction. The classic misdirection of a lit cigarette. Look at the light, not at the face. When Grim came up beside him, Priest said, without moving his mouth much, Driver got out twice, stood beside the van both times, looked at the situation with you and went back in. The second time he got back in, someone else got out of the passenger side. Went around the back, checked the rear doors, got back in. They checking to see if they're locked in or locked out? Checking if the cargo's still there, Priest said. So they've got kids in there too. That's my read. Grim looked at the van, 60 feet of darkness between him and it. He thought about the 11 children the man with the neck tattoos had described. Younger, he'd said. Younger than the 14 in the first van, which meant Reyes, Grim said. Reyes appeared from the direction of the front of the primary van. He was a compact man, 33 years old, who had done a rotation with the 10th Mountain Division and come home with a Purple Heart and a problem with enclosed spaces that he'd spent 4 years working on in various ways, some more constructive than others. He was one of the better people Grim knew, which was a category that didn't require a large number of people in it to be meaningful. What do we know about the second vehicle's occupants? Grim said. 2 in the cab confirmed, driver and passenger. both adult males. They haven't made any aggressive movement since we locked down the lot, but they haven't gotten out to talk either. Which means they're waiting for orders or waiting for an opening. One or the other. We go to them, or we let them come to us. Reyes looked at the van. Tight space between the rear fence and where they're parked. Only 2 exits from that corner of the lot, through us or over the fence, which is chain link and 6 feet, which is survivable but slow. If they're going to move, they'll try to move through us, and they'll commit when they think they've got the best window. When's the best window? When we're split, while we're managing the first van situation and haven't consolidated. So they've been waiting for us to split. That's what I'd do. Okay, Grim said. He looked at the lot, counted his people by position. 11, distributed across a space that had felt manageable 20 minutes ago and felt different now. Not unmanageable, but tighter, the margins thinner. We go to them, full presence, bikes first. Reyes said, "That could spook them into moving fast." "I know, but sitting here and waiting for their window is worse." He looked at Reyes. "You with me?" "Yeah," Reyes said, like it was the most uncomplicated answer he'd ever given, which maybe it was. They moved the bikes. It took 90 seconds to reposition, Carver and 3 others riding the machines in a slow arc across the lot that looked almost casual until it didn't, until the headlights were all pointing toward the second van's corner and the sound of 8 Harleys filling that enclosed space was the kind of thing that does not allow for a comfortable silence. Grim walked ahead of the bikes, Reyes on his left, Webb on his right, and the 3 of them crossed the lot with the headlights behind them throwing their shadows long and forward, and the second van sat there in the corner and did not move. When they were 20 feet away, the driver's door opened. The driver who stepped out was not the same profile as the man with the neck tattoos. He was younger, early 30s, dressed in work clothes that were meant to look ordinary, and the way he held himself communicated the particular alertness of someone who has been sitting in a van for 20 minutes deciding what story he was going to tell when this moment arrived. "There a problem?" the driver said. "Yeah," Grim said. "Open the back." "I don't know what you're—" "Open the back of the van." The driver looked at the bikes, the lights, Grim's face. He looked past Grim at the primary van, where the side door was still open, and Teo and Lana were moving children toward the diner in a steady, quiet stream. Something shifted in the driver's face. Not surrender. A different calculation. The look of someone who has just decided that the thing they thought was the worst possible outcome has been replaced by something worse. He said quietly, "If I open that door, they'll know." "Who'll know?" Grim said. "The people who are watching this road." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Grim held the driver's gaze and let the ripples move outward and felt Reyes, beside him, go very still. "There's a camera," the driver said. "On the highway overpass, back a quarter mile. Live feed. They've been watching since your bikes pulled in." Grim stared at him. "Who's watching?" "The people who run the ranch," the driver said. "If I open that door and they see what's happening, they won't send help. They'll clean house." He said the last 2 words with a very specific weight that left no ambiguity about what cleaning house meant in this context. The ranch, 60 miles east-northeast, more children, an unknown number. Grim turned to Webb. "Tell me what I'm thinking." Webb looked at the highway. At the distant overpass, a gray concrete shape just visible at the edge of the parking lot lights. Back at Grim. Someone at the other end of that camera has been watching this situation develop in real time. Whatever is happening at the ranch right now is happening in response to what they've seen here. "Yes," Grim said. "Which means we've already started a clock we didn't know we were starting." "Yes." Webb looked at his boots for a moment, the way he sometimes did when he was doing math that he didn't like the answer to. "How far to the ranch at highway speed?" 45 minutes, maybe 50. "And we don't know how long ago they saw us and started moving." "No." "So the clock could already be—" "Yeah," Grim said. "It could already be." The cold in the parking lot had gotten into his lungs. He breathed through it. He looked at the driver, and at the van, and at the overpass, and at the 10 bikes behind him, and at the diner window where Cheryl's outline was visible, moving between children who were, right now, in the warmest and safest place they'd been in days. 25 children. In the diner, being triaged. Warm. Accounted for. And somewhere 60 miles east-northeast, in a fortified ranch he'd never seen, children who were not warm, not accounted for, and who were, right now, in real time, because of what a camera on an overpass had seen, at significantly more risk than they'd been 45 minutes ago. He thought about Nadia's sister, 8 years old, in the first van. She was in the diner now. She was okay. He thought about the children at the ranch. He didn't know their names. He didn't know their ages. He knew only that they existed, and that the people responsible for them now knew, with certainty, that something had gone wrong at a truck stop on Route 89, and that the calculus at the ranch had just changed in ways he could not fully predict but could, from experience, estimate. He went back inside. The diner had been transformed in the way that spaces transform when they become emergency rooms. Not physically. The mustard vinyl and the non-spinning stools and the pie case were all still where they'd been, but in atmosphere, in the pressure of its purpose. Teo was at a booth with a child across from him, examining a wrist with calm professional attention. Lana was at the counter with 3 of the younger children, speaking softly in a mixture of languages, her hands doing the particular work of keeping frightened small things from tipping over the edge into panic. Carver was at the back booth with the oldest girl, the 14-year-old who'd spoken to Grimm from inside the first van, and they were talking in low voices. Cheryl moved between all of it with water and soup and small calibrations of warmth, doing what she did. Reading the room, filling the gaps, being useful in the way that people who have spent their lives in service industries and paid close attention to human beings are useful in moments that require exactly that. Nadia was in the corner booth. Beside her was a smaller child, 7 or 8, dark-haired, the same bone structure, the same careful eyes. The younger sister. She was leaning against Nadia's side with her eyes half closed, the profound exhaustion of a body that has been running on cortisol for too long, finally getting permission to stop. Nadia looked up when Grimm came in. He walked to her booth and sat across from her and put his forearms on the table. He looked at the younger girl. "She okay?" "She's tired," Nadia said. "She will be okay." Then lower. "Are we safe here?" Grimm's hands were flat on the table. He kept them flat. "Right now, yes." Nadia looked at him with eyes that were 12 years old and 60 years old simultaneously. "But not later." He didn't look away from her. "There are other children. Not here. Somewhere else. I found out about them tonight because of you." He let that sit for a moment. "I have to decide what to do about that." "You will go," she said. "That's not decided yet." "You will go," she said again. It wasn't a prediction. It was a reading of character, delivered with the accuracy of someone who had recently placed a very large bet on her ability to read people correctly and needed to know that bet had been sound. Grimm exhaled slowly. Outside, the Harleys sat in the lot in the cold. He could hear them even through the glass, the tick of cooling metal, the small sounds of machines that had just come down from their work. He went back to the booth where Decker was sitting. Decker had a napkin on the table with something written on it in the cramped handwriting of a former sergeant who had learned to write small because small writing survives conditions that large writing doesn't. Grimm looked at the napkin, distances, times, variables. "We've got a camera problem," Grimm said, and laid out what the second van's driver had told him. Decker listened without interrupting. When Grimm finished, Decker looked at the napkin, then at Grimm. "If they're watching in real time, the clock started the moment we rode in," Decker said. "That's my math. We've been here—" Decker checked his watch. 53 minutes. 53 minutes. At a facility 60 miles away, staffed by an organization with a federal connection and enough resources to maintain a live surveillance feed on a highway truck stop, that was 53 minutes of knowing that something had gone wrong with the supply chain they'd built and maintained, and were operating under the protection of someone with a badge. "What do they do?" Grimm said. "In 53 minutes, what's their first move?" Decker thought. "Secure the asset. Move it or destroy the evidence." "Move it or destroy the evidence," Grimm repeated. The words were flat and ordinary, and they referred to children. He looked at Carver. Carver was still with the older girl, and the older girl was talking now, more than she'd talked when she'd been in the van. The particular outpouring of someone who has held compressed information under impossible pressure and has finally found what feels like a container that won't break if she puts the weight into it. Carver was listening with the full-body attention she gave things she intended to act on, not nodding or performing empathy, but actually hearing, actually capturing, the way a person does when what they're hearing is tactical and they know it. Grimm waited until a natural pause and said, "Carver." She came over, sat. "Her name's Amara," she said. "She's 14. She was in transit for 9 days before tonight. She speaks 4 languages, which is how she's been tracking information other people in the van didn't have." A pause. "She says the ranch is called something in Spanish she's heard twice. La Hacienda del Silencio. She heard the name on a phone call 8 days ago." Another pause. "She also says there are children at the ranch who've been there longer than 2 weeks. She heard a number once. She didn't want to say it." "She say it anyway?" Grimm asked. Carver looked at him. 43. The number moved through the table like a current. 43 children in a fortified ranch 60 miles from where they were sitting, with a live camera feed pointing at them, 54 minutes ago, and an organization that had federal coverage and the specific ruthlessness of an enterprise that had been running long enough to build infrastructure. Grimm. It was Priest from the door. He'd come in from outside. His face was doing the thing Priest's face did when he had something to report that he'd taken a few extra seconds to verify before bringing to the table, because Priest had a particular aversion to being the person who delivered inaccurate intelligence. "The camera on the overpass. I went and looked at it." "And?" "It's not a camera," Priest said. "It's a relay. Wireless transmitter with a pinhole lens. Professional equipment. Not city infrastructure. Someone mounted it up there, maybe 6 months ago, by the rust pattern on the bracket." He paused. "That means they've been watching this specific stretch of road, this truck stop, for 6 months." He paused again. "This stop isn't random. This stop is a waypoint. They use it regularly." Grimm let that land. A waypoint. The truck stop with no name on its sign, in the middle of the Arizona desert, at the edge of the territory of a woman named Cheryl, who had seen everything at least once. A regular stopping point in an operation that had been running for... how long? 18 months, the man with the neck tattoos had said, but that was his personal entry point. The operation itself could be older. The relay on the overpass had been there 6 months. The corruption inside the federal layer could go back further. He looked at Cheryl. Cheryl was refilling water cups for the children at the counter. She looked up and met his eyes across the room, and in her face was the particular expression of someone who has been standing in the middle of something without knowing it, and has just, in the last hour, begun to understand the full shape of what they've been standing in. It was not a comfortable expression, but it was a clear one. He went to the counter. "Cheryl?" She stopped pouring. "Yeah." "This van. Tonight's van. Was it the first time you've seen it at this stop?" She set the pitcher down carefully. "No," she said. "Third time, roughly every 3 weeks, different drivers, always at night, always the same parking behavior, far end of the lot, away from the lights, gone by 4 a.m. She paused. "I thought it was produce. Undocumented workers, maybe. I thought..." She stopped. "You didn't know," Grimm said. "I didn't look," she said. It was not the same thing, and she knew it, and she was not going to let herself pretend otherwise. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dry. She was angry at herself in the specific way of someone who is going to carry a thing for a very long time. And Grimm recognized it because it was a thing he carried himself and had been carrying since a compound with a blue door in Kandahar. "You see a doctor, a lawyer, a cop in here regularly?" Grimm said. She stared at him. "What?" "Anyone. Local official. Someone with a badge or a title who comes in more than once a month. Regular customer." Cheryl went through her mental catalog with the expression of someone who doesn't like where the search is taking them. "There's a county assessor, comes in every other Thursday, and a..." She stopped. Her face changed. "There's a man. Comes in about once a month. Doesn't wear a uniform, but he's got that bearing. You know the bearing." "Yes," Grimm said. "He pays cash, tips well. always sits facing the door. She paused. He was here 2 days ago. Grim felt something shift in his chest. The architecture of it, the way it all connected, the relay, the waypoint, the federal signature on the van's registration, the regular cash-paying customer who sat facing the door and tipped well. "Okay," Grim said. He put his hand flat on the counter. "Okay." He went back to Decker's table and sat down, and for a moment he just breathed. The diner sounds moved around him. Children's voices, Teo's medical murmurs, Lana's language work, the small domestic noise of Cheryl's kitchen, the warm smell of the chicken soup, the coffee he still hadn't drunk. Decker waited. 43 children, Grim said. At a ranch I know the direction and rough distance of, and nothing else. Guarded by an unknown number of people with an organizational structure deep enough to have federal cover. With a surveillance relay that's been watching this road for 6 months and has been watching us specifically for the past 55 minutes. He looked at Decker. And a clock that I don't know how much time is left on. Decker said nothing. I need you to tell me I'm crazy, Grim said. You're not, Decker said. I know. The silence between them had weight. It was the weight of 16 years of knowing each other, of knowing exactly how the other man's decision process worked, of knowing that the moment one of them said the out-loud thing, the thing that had been building pressure in the room for the last hour, the thing that everyone at the table and some of the people not at the table had already arrived at independently. The moment it was said, it was real and it was committed and there was no unsaying it. Grim looked at the window, the bikes in the lot, the cold, the dark desert stretching away from the parking lot lights in every direction, flat and enormous and without opinion about the people moving through it. He looked at his hand, at the ghost of 3 letters in dried blood on his palm from where he'd touched the fuel tank. He turned back to Decker. We're going to the ranch, Grim said. Decker looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his pen and turned the napkin over and began to write. Tell me what you need, Decker said. Grim opened his mouth to answer. The diner's front door opened. It wasn't one of the revenants. It wasn't the man with the neck tattoos. It was a woman. Mid-40s, short dark hair, wearing a state police jacket over civilian clothes, badge visible, hand already on the door frame as she took in the scene in front of her with the rapid full-room assessment of a law enforcement officer who has walked into something that is significantly larger than the call she received. She looked at the children, at Teo's medical kit, at the revenants distributed through the diner, at Grim. She said, Who's in charge here? Grim stood up slowly. I am. She looked at him for 3 full seconds, at the cut, at the scar. At the particular posture of a man who has just made a decision he is not going to unmake. State police received an anonymous call 40 minutes ago. Possible human trafficking activity at this location. She paused. Somebody made that call. Grim looked at Cheryl. Cheryl was behind the counter with her arms folded and her reading glasses on, and the expression of a woman who has just made the first decision in a chain of decisions that she doesn't regret and isn't going to apologize for. The trooper looked at the children again, 25 of them, in a diner in the middle of the Arizona desert at 12:43 in the morning. Her face went through something that was not quite emotion and not quite procedure, but something between them. The reordering that happens when training and reality arrive at the same moment and don't perfectly overlap. I need you to tell me everything, she said to Grim. Grim looked at her. He thought about what the second van's driver had said. A federal connection, a call that made roadblocks disappear, a name that wasn't a real name. He thought about the state police jacket, about the difference between state and federal jurisdictions, and what that difference meant in the architecture of a corruption that lives specifically inside a federal signature. He thought about 43 children in a ranch 60 miles away. He said, How much do you know about the operation running through this truck stop? She blinked. Not confusion, recalibration. I know what I was told on the call. Trafficking. Possible children. Nothing about the van, the waypoint, the relay on the overpass? She was still. What relay? He looked at her for a long moment. Ritter faced the way he'd been reading faces in difficult places for 20 years. The confusion was real. The calculation behind it was the calculation of a competent person encountering information that was not in any briefing she'd received. Okay, Grimm said. He made a decision. He hated making it with incomplete information about her, but the clock was running, and incomplete information was the condition they were all operating in tonight. Sit down. I'm going to tell you everything I know, and then you're going to tell me something. She sat. What's your name? Grimm said. Vasquez, she said. Sergeant Diane Vasquez. Okay, Sergeant. He put his hands flat on the table. Here's what happened tonight, and here's the problem. He looked at her. And then I'm going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer it straight, because 43 kids are sitting in a building 60 miles from here, and the clock on them has been running for almost an hour. Vasquez looked at the children in the diner. Ateo and Lana and Carver and all the revenants who were doing what they were doing. Quiet, efficient, without theater, the work of people who understood what necessary looked like and did it without waiting to be asked. She looked back at Grimm. Tell me, she said. He did. When he finished, Vasquez was quiet for 30 seconds. She was doing something specific with that silence. Not performing thought, but actually thinking. The particular stillness of someone running a serious calculation under pressure. When she came out of it, she looked at Grimm with an expression that had shifted from the procedural authority she'd walked in with to something more operational, more unguarded, more aligned with the specific gravity of what was actually happening. The federal signature on the van's registration, she said. I can't clear that in the next hour. I can't even verify it in the next hour without going through channels that, given what you're describing, I can't guarantee are clean. She paused. What I can tell you is that if you ride to that ranch without any kind of backup and it goes wrong, 11 bikers and 11 dead phones are the only record that any of this happened tonight. I know, Grimm said. I can call for backup. It takes time. And you're right that I can't tell you with certainty that the call goes somewhere clean. I know that too. So you're going anyway. He looked at her. He looked at Decker, who had been listening to the entire exchange without moving. He looked at Reyes and Webb and Lana and Carver and Priest and Teo and all the others distributed through this diner doing the work of it. He looked at Nadia in the corner with her sister asleep against her side and her burned hand wrapped in clean gauze and her eyes watching him with the expression of someone who has already completed the calculation and is waiting for him to finish his. I'm going anyway, Grimm said. Vasquez looked at him for a long time. She was going to say something. She had several things she could say, and he could see her moving through them. The professional obligations, the jurisdictional reality, the liability, the 100 things that the badge on her jacket required her to say. Instead, she said, How many riders you got? Grimm looked at her. Because I've got a cruiser in the lot with a radio, she said, and I know this county better than your GPS does. And I've been a cop for 19 years, and I have not once, called for backup from a channel I couldn't verify and had it go right. The table was very still. You're not a state resource, Grimm said, carefully. Not right now, she said. Right now I'm a woman in a diner at 1 a.m. who just looked at 25 children and heard what you told me about 43 more. She held his gaze. How many riders? Grimm looked at Decker. Decker looked at his napkin. Then he looked at the ceiling, the way Decker looked at things when he was making a phone call he'd been considering for a while. He pulled out his phone. Let me make some calls, Decker said. Who are you calling? Grimm said. Decker met his eyes. People who've been waiting for a reason. He put the phone to his ear and walked to the back of the diner. And from the corner booth, across the whole length of the room, Nadia watched him go. Then she looked at Grimm, and the expression on her face, for the first time in the entire night, was not the hollow calculation of survival or the desperate arithmetic of a girl who has bet everything on a stranger's face. It was something else. It was the first breath of something that had not yet decided to call itself hope, but was standing at that door with its hand raised to knock, waiting to see if anyone was going to answer. Outside, the Harleys sat in the cold Arizona dark. Inside, Decker was talking to someone. His voice was low and Grimm couldn't make out the words, but the tone of it, the particular cadence of a man who is calling in something that has been owed for a very long time, something that has been accumulating interest through years of silence and smoke and chosen exile. That tone carried across the diner and through the walls and into the night. And then Decker said something short and definitive into the phone and lowered it and turned around. He walked back to the table. He looked at Grim. 17, he said. Grim stared at him. 17 what? 17 more riders, Decker said. An hour out. They're already moving. The number landed in the room like a stone. 17 more, plus the 11 here. 28 riders on a fortified ranch at 60 miles with a surveillance feed that had been running for 56 minutes, watching a truck stop where 25 children had just been pulled out of 2 cargo vans, watching the clock on whatever their protocol required when a waypoint went dark. The ranch knew they were coming. The ranch had known for almost an hour. And somewhere inside La Hacienda del Silencio, in the cold desert dark, 43 children were waiting without knowing what they were waiting for. Whether the next hour was going to be rescue or the terrible alternative that the man with the neck tattoos had communicated with 2 words and a very specific wait. Move it or destroy the evidence. Grim stood up from the table. He looked around the diner one last time. At all of it. The children, his people, Cheryl, Vasquez, Nadia in the corner with her sister. He looked at all of it the way you look at something when you're about to go somewhere you are not certain you will return from. Not with sentiment, but with the specific precision of a man burning the image into the only storage system that matters in the field. He put on his jacket. He walked to Nadia's booth. He crouched down. He looked at her. We're going to go get them, he said. She looked back at him. The not quite hope was still in her face. She put her unbandaged hand on the table and looked at it, and then looked at him and said very quietly, "Come back." He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He stood up. He walked to the door, and behind him the Iron Revenants rose from their seats, one by one, and followed him out into the cold. They rode in the dark with their lights off for the first 3 miles. It was Vasquez's call, and it was the right call, and nobody argued it. Running dark on a desert highway at 1:17 in the morning with no moon and the temperature at 48 degrees and dropping was the kind of thing that required either absolute trust in the rider ahead of you or a specific relationship with your own mortality that most people didn't have, and the Iron Revenants, to varying degrees, did. They rode by the taillights of Vasquez's cruiser, which ran without flashers, without siren, just the red glow of its brake lights when the road curved and the whitewash of its headlights cutting the desert dark ahead, and the 11 Harleys followed it like a shadow that had decided to move on its own. Grim rode point behind her. The cold came through his jacket in the way desert cold comes through everything. Not gradually, but all at once. A total commitment of temperature that found every gap in the leather and went straight to the bone. He felt it in his reconstructed knee. He felt it in the scar on his jaw. He felt it as a thing that was clarifying rather than uncomfortable, the way extreme cold sometimes functions as a kind of brutal honesty about the physical reality of a situation, stripping away the noise and leaving only the essential. The essential was this. He was riding toward a fortified compound with an unknown number of guards and 43 children and a surveillance operation that had been watching him for over an hour. The essential was also this. Decker had made phone calls and 17 more riders were converging from the north, an hour behind them at highway speed, which meant Grim and his 11 were going to arrive at the ranch somewhere between 35 and 50 minutes ahead of any reinforcement. In the arithmetic of what they were riding toward, that gap was everything. He thought about Vasquez in the cruiser ahead of him. He had made a judgment call about her in the diner, and he had made it with incomplete information and under time pressure, which was the condition under which most of the consequential decisions of his life had been made. He believed her confusion had been genuine. He believed her anger, underneath the controlled procedural exterior, was the real anger of someone who had spent 19 years in law enforcement and had just been shown the shape of something that had been operating inside her jurisdiction undercover she hadn't known existed. That belief was a wager. He had made it. He was riding with it now. At the 3-mile mark, she turned her headlights back on. The Revenants clicked theirs on behind her, one at a time, the sequence of it like a sentence being completed one word at a time, and the road opened up in front of them orange and gray, the flat Arizona desert on both sides running to the horizon. The sky overhead a deep black going purple at the edges, where the distant city lights of Prescott reflected off the low cloud that had been building from the west for the past hour. It was going to rain. Grim could smell it, the specific pre-rain smell of wet caliche, and desert sage and cold pressure dropping over the plateau. Not tonight, maybe. Maybe early morning. The kind of rain that came to the Arizona high desert in late October and meant business when it arrived. Vasquez's brake lights flared and he matched them, the column behind him rippling like a wave. She had pulled to the shoulder. He pulled up beside her, and she had her window down, a paper map spread on the steering wheel. A real paper map, not a phone, which told him something. Her flashlight on it. 2.3 miles, she said. There's a dirt access road, no signage. It's not on any public map, but it's on the county assessor's survey from 2019. I pulled the parcel number from the state database before I left the stop. She tapped the map. The ranch property is registered to a holding company, Agave Desert Properties, LLC, incorporated in Nevada, 2017. She looked up. The LLC's registered agent is a law firm in Scottsdale. That's not going to get us anywhere tonight, Grimm said. I know, but the property boundary backs against BLM land on 3 sides. The only road in or out is the access road. She paused, which means there's only one direction they can move vehicles. Or they're already moved, Grimm said. She held his gaze. Or that. He looked at the road, the darkness ahead, the 2.3 miles that now felt like a specific unit of time rather than distance. What else? The parcel is 800 acres. Ranch compound is historically in the northeast quadrant based on satellite imagery I pulled 18 months ago. I had a separate case, unrelated, but the property came up on the edge of a search radius and I looked at it. She stopped herself. Something moved across her face. I looked at it and I filed it. I had no probable cause. I had nothing. The last word landed like something she'd been carrying since the diner. Grimm said, "You couldn't have known." I know that, she said, in a tone that meant she knew it rationally and it didn't help. He understood that perfectly. He didn't say so. Northeast quadrant of an 800-acre parcel, he said. How far in from the access road? Based on the satellite image, maybe a mile and a half. We can't ride in a mile and a half on gravel in the dark without being heard. No, she said. How far can we get before we go on foot? She thought. Quarter mile. Maybe. If they're not running listening posts on the perimeter. If they're professional enough to have a relay camera on a highway overpass, they're professional enough to have listening posts. She nodded once. He looked back at his riders. 11 machines, 11 people, the cold, the pre-rain smell. He thought about Decker's phone calls and the 17 riders an hour north. He thought about the surveillance feed and the hour and 4 minutes that had now elapsed since the feed had been watching the truck stop. Here's what I need from you, he said to Vasquez. I need you to position the cruiser at the access road entrance. Lights off. If a vehicle comes out of that access road, any vehicle, you stop it. She looked at him. I'm a one-person unit. I know. If a vehicle comes out with armed personnel and I try to stop it, I know, Grimm said. That's your call to make. She looked at the map, then at her radio, then out at the desert. The thing she was deciding was a real thing, and he gave her the space to decide it without performance from his side. She was not his soldier. She was not his anything. She was a person who had walked into a diner an hour ago and had looked at 25 children and had heard what he'd told her, and had made a series of decisions since then, and the decisions had led her here, to a shoulder on a desert highway, at 1:23 in the morning with a paper map and a radio she didn't entirely trust. Okay, she said, go. He nodded once and pulled back onto the road. 2.3 miles dissolved under the wheels in the way miles dissolve when you're moving toward something rather than away from it. The Harleys ran low and steady, Grimm keeping the throttle at a register that was barely above idle, not because it changed the fundamental acoustic reality of 11 motorcycles on an open road, but because the slower speed let him read the ground ahead, the surface changes, the shoulder, the geometry of the approach. He saw the access road before the headlights hit it directly. The grade change, the break in the scrub that ran along the shoulder, the 2 tire-width tracks of compressed calichy running east into the dark, no signage, no gate, just the road and what it led to. He stopped the column, pulled Decker up beside him. Quarter mile on the bikes, Grimm said, then we walk. Listening posts, Decker said. Assume yes. Decker looked at the access road, at the desert on both sides, at the cloud building over the western plateau. The rain's going to help. If it comes. It's coming, Decker said. He had a particular confidence about weather that Grimm had tested over 16 years and had rarely found wrong, a residue of years spent in environments where getting weather wrong meant getting people killed. 30 minutes, maybe less. We may not have 30 minutes. No, Decker said. We probably don't. Grimm turned back to the column. Priest, Webb, Reyes, Lana, Carver, Tio, and the others. Faces in the dark, visible only in the residual glow of their dash lights, each one a particular kind of damage, shaped by particular circumstances into something that had arrived, tonight, at this access road in the Arizona desert. He looked at them, and they looked back, and no one said anything because the looking was the conversation. He turned onto the access road. The caliche was dry and hard, and the bikes moved quietly on it, quieter than asphalt, the sound of the engines dropping into the scrub and dissipating in the way that open desert dissipates sound, not absorbing it, but breaking it apart, scattering it into the brush and the rock and the enormous, indifferent dark. A quarter-mile in, Grimm slowed and stopped and killed his engine, and the others did the same, one by one, until the silence of the desert moved back in around them like water filling a displaced space. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then they heard it. Not from the direction of the ranch, from behind them, from the direction of the highway, the sound of vehicles, bote, not motorcycles, not Vasquez's cruiser, but the heavier, lower sound of truck engines, more than one, moving fast and then slowing, the specific deceleration of vehicles that have spotted something on the shoulder and are deciding what to do about it. Grimm looked at Decker. Decker already had his phone to his ear. 2 seconds. Then, Vasquez? He listened. His face in the dark did something Grimm could not fully read, which was unusual. Decker's face was generally legible to him. Decker lowered the phone. He looked at Grimm with an expression that Grimm had seen on his face twice in 16 years, both times in places with no good exit. 2 trucks, Decker said. Just pulled off the highway at the access road entrance. They're behind Vasquez. She's boxed in. Grimm said, How many? She counted 4 in each truck before she got down. 8. 8 people in 2 trucks, now between Vasquez's cruiser and the highway, at the entrance of the only road in or out of the property. Not reinforcements coming to the ranch. Reinforcements that had been waiting somewhere close enough to respond in, Grimm checked his watch, 71 minutes from the moment the surveillance feed had seen his bikes in the truck stop parking lot. An hour and 11 minutes. Someone had staged vehicles within response distance of this road. Someone had anticipated exactly this scenario. A problem at the waypoint, a need to lock down the access route, and had pre-positioned accordingly. That was not the behavior of an improvised operation. That was the behavior of something that had been running long enough and with enough resources to have contingency protocols, to have a response team close enough to arrive in 71 minutes, to have a surveillance relay and a federal connection and a registered holding company and a law firm in Scottsdale. They know we're on the road, Grimm said. If they're sealing the entrance, they know we're on the road, which means they know we're between them and the compound. Decker said nothing for a moment. Then, Grimm, if they came to seal the road, they didn't come alone. He let that breathe. The compound was already activated. These trucks are the cork in the bottle. There's another force at the compound end. The geometry of it. Grimm ran it in 3 seconds. 11 riders on a gravel road in the dark, 3/4 of a mile from a fortified compound that had been on alert for over an hour, a blocking force now at their 6 cutting off the exit. Vasquez's cruiser pinned at the access road entrance with 8 armed people behind it. They were inside the bottle. He keyed his phone and called Vasquez. She picked up on the first ring. You okay? He said. For the moment. Her voice was level, the particular level of someone running hot underneath a controlled surface. They haven't approached yet. They're sitting in the trucks, waiting. Waiting for what? I think they're waiting to see if I call it in. Are you? A pause. My radio's right here, she said. But if you're right about the federal coverage, if I call this in through normal channels and someone intercepts that call, It goes to the wrong people, and you've confirmed our position and given them a timeline. Yeah, she said. Is there anyone you can call directly? Not through dispatch. A personal contact, someone you'd bet your life on. Another pause. Longer. The pause of someone going through a mental list with a very high filter. Maybe, she said. One person, county sheriff. He and I came up together, but I can't verify his exposure to whatever federal layer you're describing. How long have you known him? 22 years. Grim thought for exactly 3 seconds. Call him. Tell him everything. Tell him where you are and what's behind you and what's up the road. If he's clean, you need him. If he's not, we're already compromised. It doesn't change what we're doing. She said, What are you doing? I'm going to the compound, Grim said. A silence on the line. Grim, you hold that entrance, he said. Gicho, you keep those trucks from moving up the road as long as you can. Don't put yourself in a position you can't walk out of, but hold it. For how long? He looked up the dark access road toward where the northeast quadrant of an 800-acre parcel waited in the desert. 43 children, an activated compound, an unknown force between him and them. As long as it takes, he said, and ended the call. He turned to the revenants. 11 people in the desert dark, breath visible in the cold, the smell of engine heat coming off the bikes, the pre-rain weight building in the air above them. He didn't give a speech. He didn't have speeches in him, and they wouldn't have wanted one if he did. He said, blocking force at the entrance. We're inside the perimeter. Compound is activated. We go in on foot now while they're still organizing their response. He paused. Anyone who wants to stay with the bikes, stay. Nobody's being asked to die tonight. Nobody stayed with the bikes. They moved fast. Grim set the pace, and it was faster than comfortable for his knee, and he didn't give his knee the floor on that discussion. The Caliche road was pale enough in the dark to follow without light, the scrub on both sides a darker mass against the sky, and they moved through it in a loose column, no sound beyond boots on packed earth, and the small clicks and shifts of people moving in leather in the cold. The cloud from the west was moving faster than Decker had predicted. Grim could feel it in the pressure drop, in the way the desert smell had shifted from dry sage to something wetter and more complicated. And when he looked up, he could see the stars disappearing one quadrant at a time behind cloud cover moving east like a slow tide. The rain was going to come. Half a mile in, Priest, who was on the right flank, raised his fist and the column stopped. Grim moved up to him. Priest pointed low at the scrub 15 yards off the road to the right. A shape, seated, leaning against a rock, not moving, too still to be an animal. Grim watched it for 10 seconds. It didn't move. He watched the shape of it against the sky, the outline wrong in a specific way, the geometry of a person who had sat down and not gotten back up. He left the road with Webb. The man was sitting against the rock with his back to it and his legs straight out and his head tilted to the left at the particular angle of unconsciousness. He was breathing, shallow but consistent. He had been hit with something, professionally. No visible weapon on him, but a radio clipped to his belt, earpiece still in. Grim pulled the earpiece and listened and heard the static of an open channel with nothing on it, and then a voice, distant, saying something in Spanish that ended in a number he could make out. 2 minutos. 2 minutes. He looked at Webb. Webb was already looking at the man's radio. Grim handed him the earpiece and Webb listened and Grim watched his face. Webb lowered it. Channel's live, he said very quietly. 2 people talking. One's at the compound, one's somewhere south of us. He paused. The one at the compound said something about the barn. The barn, Grim said. And then a word I've heard before. Webb's face in the dark. He said it the way people say it when they mean hurry up and finish. Grim stared at him. The barn. 43 children. An hour and 17 minutes since the surveillance feed had seen the bikes in the truck stop lot. A voice on a radio saying the barn and hurry up and finish in the same sentence. He stood up. He looked at the compound direction. Something had changed in his chest. Some last restraining mechanism. Some final governor that he hadn't known was still running. He felt it release. Whatever was going to happen in the next 20 minutes, he was no longer trying to manage it into a shape that anyone who hadn't ridden down this road tonight would recognize as measured or proportionate or procedurally sound. "We move," Grimm said. "Now, fast." They moved. The last half-mile happened differently than the first. The pace was no longer stealthy. It was urgent, the revenant spreading laterally off the road into the scrub on both sides, not for concealment, but for dispersal. 11 people approaching a position don't want to be a single-column target. Grimm stayed on the road because the road was fastest, and fast was the only variable that mattered now. The compound appeared the way desert structures appear in the dark. Suddenly, without gradual approach, one moment scrub, and one moment the specific angularity of human construction. A fence line first, chain link topped with wire, running north-south. Then lights behind it. Not floodlights, smaller portable work lights set up in a cluster near the center of the compound. Then buildings. 3 of them, low and utilitarian, the kind of construction that had been added to over time in a pragmatic rather than an aesthetic mode. A main house, older, stucco exterior going gray. A large metal outbuilding that had originally been a garage or equipment storage. And south of those, larger, darker, a long low barn built out of concrete block with a corrugated metal roof. The barn. The portable work lights were near the barn. Grimm counted shapes near the lights. 4, maybe 5. Moving with purpose. He hit the fence at a run, not slowing. Chain link was negotiable. It was wire-top chain link that was the problem, and he was inside before the theoretical problem could articulate itself. The others came through at points up and down the fence line, finding weak spots or simply going over at the spots where the chain link had been staked improperly, the corners, the places where tension had worked the stake loose over time. From the direction of the main house, a voice shouted something, not at them, into a radio or a phone. A report, frantic, the specific vocal quality of someone communicating upward that a situation had gone from managed to not managed. Grimm was 50 yards from the barn. One of the shapes near the lights turned and saw him, and the night went from tense to active in the way it goes. All at once, a threshold crossed, no going back. He kept running. What happened in the next 4 minutes was not clean, and it was not choreographed, and it was not the kind of engagement that gets described with precision in after-action reports. It was people moving fast in a dark compound in the Arizona desert, with portable work lights throwing hard-edged shadows, and the pre-rain wind picking up from the west, and the sound of shouting and boots on hard ground, and the specific chaotic compression of bodies and intention in a space too small for all the things happening in it simultaneously. What Grimm experienced of it was fragmentary, and would remain fragmentary, the way combat experiences remain. Not as a continuous narrative, but as a series of hard, bright moments separated by gaps that the mind fills in later with what must have been true. He experienced a man coming at him from the left and the impact and resolution of that. The barn door, padlocked, and Priest's bolt cutters. Priest always carried bolt cutters. Had carried them since a situation in 2018 in Albuquerque that Grimm had heard about secondhand, shearing through the lock in 2 seconds, the door swinging open. The smell. The smell was the worst thing. It was the same smell as the van, the same biological signature of many bodies in an enclosed space over a long time, but amplified, more complex, carrying in it the specific organic record of people who had been here not for 3 days but for weeks. Some of them. The smell of fear that has had time to become something even more permanent and less survivable. Grimm stepped inside. 43 children. He had been told the number. 43. He had processed it as a number, a tactical quantity, a variable in the equation of tonight. He had processed it the way you process things when you need your processing function to stay operational, and emotion is the variable that crashes the system. The number was not a number anymore. They were arranged along the walls, most of them, on pallets and in groups, some sleeping, most awake. All of them awake now. The door opening and the cold air and the shapes of people entering had brought them up from whatever edge of sleep they'd been near, and they were looking at the doorway with the expression that Grimm had seen in the van and in the diner and on Nadia's face in the parking lot, and that he was going to be seeing in whatever served as sleep for the rest of his life. He crouched down, inside the door, and he said, "We're here to get you out." Nobody moved for a moment. The particular suspended animation of people who have been inside a situation so long they have stopped being able to trust that the situation has changed. Then one child, small, maybe 7, with a bandage on one forearm, got up from a pallet in the corner and walked across the space toward him, and stopped 2 feet away and looked at him with enormous, careful eyes. He held his hand out, flat, palm up, not reaching, just offering. The child looked at his hand, at his face, at the cut on his jacket, at whatever the sum of those things communicated. Put their hand in his. Behind him, the revenants were moving through the barn, Teo already in medical assessment mode, Lana moving to the children at the far wall, speaking in multiple languages, the words finding the children they were intended for the way water finds the shape of whatever contains it. Carver was at the door calling something back to Webb outside, a status update, tactical. Grimm was still crouched with the small child's hand in his when Decker came in from outside, fast, and the look on Decker's face stopped everything in Grimm's chest. "What?" Grimm said. Decker looked at the children briefly, cataloged them, stored them, then back at Grimm. He said quietly, in the register of someone managing the volume of what they're saying rather than the content, "There's a room." "What room?" "In the main house. I went in while the others were at the fence. There's a room in the back." He stopped. The stop itself was information. Decker did not stop mid-sentence without reason. Grimm handed the small child's hand to Lana without looking. He stood up. He followed Decker out of the barn, across the compound, to the main house. The main house smelled like stale coffee and cigarette smoke, and something chemical underneath both, a cleaning agent smell that was covering something older. Decker moved through the front room, a kitchen, a table, papers, the detritus of people living in a place as a function rather than a home, to a hallway, and down it to a door at the end. The door was unlocked. Inside was a room that had been an office, a desk with 2 laptops, both still open, a printer, a shelf with physical binders, numbered, spines facing outward, a safe in the corner, door ajar, and on the desk, beside the laptops, something that Grimm looked at and then looked at again because the first look hadn't made sense, and the second look was making worse sense. A photograph. Printed, 8 by 10, on the desk in a frame. The photograph showed 4 men standing in front of what appeared to be a government building. 2 of the men were in suits. 1 was in a sheriff's department uniform. The 4th was in civilian clothes, leather jacket, a man Grimm's age, gray at the temples, the particular posture of someone who knows exactly where the camera is and how they want to present themselves to it. Grimm recognized the 4th man the way you recognize someone you've seen in a context so different from the current one that the recognition takes an extra second to route through properly. He stood with the photograph and let the routing happen. The man in the leather jacket was a man named Cal Rutherford. Cal Rutherford, who had ridden with the Iron Revenants for 11 months in 2021 and 2022, before drifting away from the club with no specific incident, no conflict, no falling out, just the gradual diminishment of presence that sometimes happened when someone found other things to do with their time. Grimm had eaten dinner at Cal Rutherford's kitchen table. He had ridden 3,000 miles in his company over 11 months. He had told him things. The things you told people when you rode with them long enough that the road created its own kind of intimacy, its own specific container of trust. He looked at the man in the suit on Cal Rutherford's left in the photograph. He looked at the badge on the man's jacket lapel, which was too small to read clearly but whose agency insignia was distinct enough to identify. Federal. Definitely federal. He looked at the binders on the shelf, each one numbered. He pulled one without choosing which and opened it, and the first page was a ledger, handwritten columns, dates and numbers and shorthand designations, the specific record-keeping of an operation that had been running long enough to require organization. He turned pages until he found a section that had a different shorthand at the top, and he looked at the shorthand and understood it in the way you understand something when the understanding makes you physically colder than the ambient temperature can account for. The shorthand was a routing code. He'd seen routing codes in the Army. The structure of this one followed a specific organizational logic. He looked at it and read the logic, and the logic told him that what he was holding was not the records of a single operation, but of a network, and that the network had not begun 18 months ago, the way the man with the neck tattoos had thought, and had not begun 6 months ago when the relay went up on the highway overpass, and had not begun in 2022 when Agave Desert Properties LLC was incorporated. The dates at the front of the ledger started in 2019. 7 years. Grimm closed the binder. He looked at Decker. Decker was looking at the laptops. He had not touched them. He was looking at what was on the screens, both still open, both displaying the same thing from slightly different angles. A dashboard. The kind of dashboard that surveillance operations run. The kind that takes feeds from multiple sources and displays them simultaneously. The kind that requires infrastructure and maintenance and a technical specialist and money. One of the feeds on the dashboard showed a view Grimm recognized. A truck stop parking lot. From above, from the overpass camera. Still live. Showing the empty lot, the bike still parked. Vasquez's cruiser gone from the shoulder where he'd last seen it. Another feed showed the access road entrance. The 2 trucks were still there, and behind the trucks, the small shape of Vasquez's cruiser. Another feed showed a view he didn't recognize at first. A parking structure. Interior, urban, the kind of structure that exists in every mid-size American city without distinction. There was a car in the frame. A man standing beside the car. The man had a phone to his ear. Grimm looked at the man in the feed. He looked at the photograph on the desk. He looked at the feed again. The man on the phone in the parking structure was Cal Rutherford. The man who had ridden with the Iron Revenants for 11 months in 2021 and 2022 and had drifted away with no specific incident and no conflict was standing in a parking structure at 1:40 in the morning, looking at his phone, and the feed was live and the feed was recording, and it was one of the feeds on the operational dashboard of the organization that had been running children through a waypoint truck stop in the Arizona desert for 7 years. Grimm set the binder down on the desk very carefully. The careful was effortful. He was aware of his own hands and what they wanted to do and was choosing, in this specific moment, not to let them do it. He said, "Decker." Decker was still looking at the screens. "Decker." "I see it," Decker said. His voice was the flattest Grimm had heard it in 16 years. "He was with us for 11 months. I know. He was in the club when we decided to set the Flagstaff route, when we set the waypoints for the Arizona circuit." The implications of this were moving through Grimm's head in the specific way that terrible implications move, not as ideas but as physical sensations, a cold that started at the sternum and went outward. He knew our routes. He knew this road. Decker turned from the screen. He looked at Grimm with an expression that had gone past the usual controlled terrain of Decker's face into something older and rawer underneath it, the face of the man who had existed before the career and the club, and the controlled professional exterior had been layered over it. "He knew Nadia would end up at that truck stop," Decker said. "Or someone like her. Because the truck stop was a waypoint, because they'd been running it for years, because the route was established." He stopped. "And he knew that if a club member found what we found tonight, the club would come here," Grimm said. The sentence finished itself in the space between them. He had been herded, not by coincidence, not by the accident of a 12-year-old girl and a burning exhaust pipe and 3 letters in blood. The truck stop was a known waypoint of an established operation. The operation had a surveillance feed on the road. The operation had a man who had ridden with the Iron Revenants for 11 months and knew their Arizona circuit, and knew Grimm's psychology and knew exactly what Grimm would do when he found children in a van. The question he could not answer yet, the question that was the most important one, was why. What did it serve to herd 11 bikers onto an access road at 1 in the morning with a blocking force at the entrance and an activated compound at the other end? He looked at the feeds on the dashboard. He looked at the blocking force trucks at the access road entrance. He looked at Vasquez's cruiser pinned behind them. He looked at the parking structure where Cal Rutherford had a phone to his ear. He thought about Decker's phone calls. The 17 riders an hour north. People who've been waiting for a reason, Decker had said. 17 riders who had gotten a call in the middle of the night from Decker's phone saying, "Come, here's the road, here's the direction." 17 riders who were now on a highway heading south, converging on an access road that a blocking force was sitting on, a blocking force with 8 armed people in 2 trucks, who were not there to stop a state police cruiser, but who had arrived after the revenants had already turned onto the access road. They're not sealing us in, Grim thought. They're waiting for us to bring the rest in. He said, Decker, the call you made to the 17 riders, who did you call? Decker looked at him. Something in his face shifted. Not guilt, nothing like guilt, but the particular expression of someone watching two pieces of information complete a pattern they had not seen coming and cannot stop from completing. I called people I trust, Decker said. People who've been out of the club for various reasons. People who still... I've known them. He stopped. Who'd you call first? Decker said the name. It was a name Grim didn't know. A man named Ortega, who had been in the club in its early years before Grim's time as president, a founding generation member. A man Decker had trusted for 20 years. How'd you get his number? Grim said. Decker stared at him. He gave it to me last year. He said keep it. In case of what? In case of something like tonight. Decker's voice had changed again. Going somewhere very quiet and very dangerous, the register of a man who is following a thread in real time and watching it lead somewhere it should not lead. He said, if anything ever came up, anything big, call him first. He said he had people who could respond. Decker looked at the desk, at the photograph, at Cal Rutherford's face in the frame. He said he had people who'd been waiting for a reason. The same phrase. People who've been waiting for a reason. Grim looked at the access road feed on the dashboard, the trucks at the entrance. 8 people. Waiting. Not advancing, not retreating, waiting for 17 more riders to arrive. They're going to let the 17 through, Grim said. They're going to let them in and then close the road behind them. 28 riders, 11 already inside, 17 coming in. 28 people inside a locked perimeter with a federal signature on the whole operation. He looked at Decker. We didn't ride to rescue anyone tonight. Decker said nothing. We were the reason. Decker, we were the reason. Whoever built this, Cal, Ortega, whoever Ortega called to call his 17, they needed a moment that would pull in enough club members to justify what comes next. Evidence of a large organized criminal element infiltrating a federal human trafficking investigation. Evidence that bikers destroyed a crime scene, that bikers assaulted federal assets. He stopped. His mouth had gone dry. The cold in the room was real and also not entirely about the temperature. The children at the truck stop, the children here, they're not the point. We are the evidence. 28 bikers at an active trafficking site at 2 a.m, no warrants, no coordination, assault of personnel, destruction of a... Grim, Decker's voice. Very quiet. We walked into a frame, Grim said. The whole thing. Nadia, the SOS on the fuel tank, all of it. The whole thing was a... Grim. Decker's hand on his arm. Stop. He stopped. He breathed. The barn was full of 43 children who were real and whose fear was real and whose condition was real and had been real for weeks, some of them, and that was not constructed and was not a frame. Nadia's burned palm was not a frame. The 3 letters in her blood on his fuel tank were not a frame. The children were real. The frame was real. Both could be true simultaneously. He knew that. He had lived in places where both were true simultaneously. The world was full of situations where something was simultaneously genuine and weaponized, where real suffering was the load-bearing element of a structure built to serve something else entirely. Someone had built a 7-year operation on the suffering of children and had decided at some point that the operation was worth protecting by engineering a scenario that would neutralize its greatest threat, the kind of people who would show up in the middle of the night with no legal cover and nothing to lose and a specific refusal to look away. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Unknown number. He answered. A voice he recognized. Not Ortega. He didn't know Ortega's voice. Not Cal Rutherford. He'd know Cal's voice in his sleep. A voice he recognized from a different context entirely, from a conversation that had happened in a different life, that he hadn't thought about in years, that was now inserting itself into this moment with the specific wrongness of a thing that should not be here. The voice said, You found the room. Not a question. Grim stood very still. I'm going to assume you're looking at the dashboard right now, the voice said. I'm going to assume you understand most of what you're seeing, and I'm going to tell you the one thing you don't understand yet, because you need to understand it before the next 12 minutes are up. Grim said, Who are you? You know who I am, the voice said. You've known me for 6 years. You've just never known what I do. 6 years. Grim ran it. People he'd known for 6 years. The club. The wider world. The occasional fringe contact. The people who drifted in and out of the Revenant's orbit without full membership. The mechanic in Scottsdale who serviced their bikes. The woman who ran the VA office in Flagstaff who had helped 3 of his members with their benefit claims. The next 12 minutes, the voice said. After that, 17 riders arrive at the access road, and the people in those trucks let them through. After that, you have a very specific and very short window to make a choice. A pause. The children are real. I want you to know that. What's been done to them is real, and I'm not going to... Don't, Grim said. Don't explain to me what's real. A silence on the line. The laptop's on the desk, the voice said. Left one. The folder marked ADL 7. Open it. Grim looked at Decker. Decker was already moving to the desk. He opened the left laptop, found the folder, opened it. Grim watched Decker's face as he read what was on the screen. Whatever was in that folder, Decker read for approximately 45 seconds. He read without expression, which for Decker meant he was reading something that required the full allocation of his processing and had left nothing available for the performance of reaction. Then Decker looked up from the screen. He looked at Grim with an expression that Grim had not seen on his face in 16 years of knowing him. Not in Helmand, not in the worst nights of the club's history, not in any of the accumulated wreckage of 2 careers spent in places that produced wreckage. He said, It's not 7 years. Grim stared at him. The ledger, Decker said. A DL7 is the audit, the full audit. He stopped. It's not 7 years, Grim. It goes back to 2009. The routing codes... He stopped again. His jaw was tight. The routing codes match a DoD contractor designation from 2009, from Afghanistan. Grim stood in the cold room in the Arizona desert at 1:53 in the morning with a phone in his hand and a photograph of Cal Rutherford on the desk and the laptop open in front of Decker and the sound of 43 children being moved toward the barn door by the revenants outside. And something happened in his chest that was not a feeling he had a name for and was not something he wanted to have a name for. 2009. Kandahar. A compound with a blue door, a DoD contractor designation. The voice on the phone said quietly, Now you understand. And across the compound, over the corrugated roof of the barn, over the scrub and the caliche, and the 800 acres of desert in every direction, from somewhere north on the highway, carried on the cold pre-rain air that was now moving fast from the west, the sound of motorcycles. 17 engines, arriving right on schedule, 12 minutes. Grim put the phone in his pocket and looked at Decker and said, Get everyone out of the barn, now. Move the children to the east fence line, BLM land, away from the road. He was already moving. Do not let the 17 riders through that entrance. How do I stop them from outside the... Call Vasquez. She has a radio. She has a cruiser. Tell her to block the road before the trucks let anyone through. Decker was already on the phone. Grim went back to the desk. He looked at the laptop. A DL7. The audit going back to 2009. He pulled the power cable from the back of the laptop and folded the machine under his arm. He grabbed the binders. All of them. 7 of them. Heavy. The physical record of something that had been running since before some of the children in that barn had been born. He grabbed them in both arms and he walked out of the house. The compound was moving. The revenants had the barn door fully open and were bringing the children out in groups, the older ones helping the younger. Lana running a head count at the barn door, Teo with a child over his shoulder who couldn't walk on their own. The portable work lights were still running, flooding the compound in white, and in that white light the whole scene had the quality of a thing that was simultaneously terrible and necessary, the way surgery is both of those things at once. Grim looked at the east fence. 150 yards. BLM, land beyond it. Open desert, no structures, no road. The specific anonymity of land that belonged to no particular person, and therefore could become, for the next 12 minutes, a place that existed outside the frame that was closing around them. "Carver," he said. She was beside him before he finished saying her name. "Take the kids over the east fence. Everyone you can move. You don't stop for anything on this side of that fence. You understand?" "What are you doing?" "I'm staying here." She looked at him. She looked at the laptop under his arm and the binders. "Grim. Carver." He met her eyes. "The evidence goes with the kids. Whatever happens in this compound in the next 10 minutes, that—" He pushed the laptop and the binders into her arms. "Does not stay here." She took them without another word. He looked at Webb and Reyes. "With me." From the north, over the flat desert, the motorcycle sound was louder now. 17 engines working through distance, closing fast on the access road entrance. Grim checked his watch. 9 minutes, maybe less, before they hit the entrance. Before the trucks either let them through or didn't. Before whatever Vasquez could do with a radio and a cruiser was tested against what the people in those trucks had been sent here to accomplish. His phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. He answered it. "You're moving the children east," the voice said. "That's good. That's the right move." A pause. "The trucks at the entrance have orders to let the 17 through once they arrive. They will not engage Vasquez directly. She's a state officer, and that creates a paper trail they don't want. But once the 17 are inside the perimeter, the trucks move up the road and the frame closes." "Why are you telling me this?" Grim said. "Because the frame was never supposed to include the children." Grim stopped walking. Something in the voice, something that had shifted, the controlled informational quality of the earlier calls gone, replaced by something rawer and less managed. "Say that again," Grim said. "The operation was supposed to run clean. The children were supposed to be moved before tonight. The transfer at the truck stop was running 6 hours behind schedule. If it had run on time, you would have ridden into an empty waypoint, found nothing, ridden on." A pause. "The girl wasn't supposed to still be there." "Nadia." Grim's chest did something that he didn't give space to right now. Later. Whatever that was, it lived later. "Who are you?" he said again. A silence that went on 3 seconds longer than informational silences go. "Someone who has been inside this for 4 years, the voice said. "Someone who found the 2009 connection 8 months ago and has been trying to find a way to surface it that doesn't result in—" The voice stopped. Then, quieter, "The ADL7 file. The routing codes from 2009. There's a name in the final section, page 41. That name is the only person who can close this completely. That name has a federal shield that has kept this running for 17 years. Without that name, the evidence you're holding buries the operation, but the architect walks." "Give me the name," Grim said. "I can't say it on a line that's being monitored." "Then what good are you to me right now?" "I'm the person who is going to unlock the east gate in approximately 90 seconds, the voice said. "Because the east fence has a gate that isn't on any county survey, and I know the combination. And I'm the person who called your club tonight through a channel that I knew Decker would follow because Decker trusts Ortega, and Ortega is part of this," Grim said. "Ortega has been an asset of the organization since 2020. He doesn't know the full picture. He knows he makes calls when certain people tell him to make calls." A pause. "He called Decker tonight because I told him to, because I needed 28 riders at this compound with the evidence from that office, and I needed the frame to look like it was closing, and I needed the people operating the frame to commit to it completely before I—" The voice stopped. "Before I what?" "There are people coming to this compound from the south," the voice said. "Not the trucks at the entrance. Different people. They don't have badges. They have been waiting for the frame to close because a closed frame with 28 bikers inside is a clean ending. No testimony, no trial. Clean." Another pause. "They're 12 minutes out." Webb was beside Grim. Had heard enough of the one-sided conversation to read the shape of it. His face in the work lights was the face of a man doing fast math with bad numbers. "How many?" Grim said. "Enough." "That's not an answer." 14. Armed. Vehicles. They're coming on the south approach. There's a ranch road that runs parallel to the property's southern boundary. It connects to a state route 7 miles from here. It's not on the county map either. A pause. You have 11 people in the compound, 43 children moving toward the east fence, and 17 riders about to enter a kill zone from the north. Grimm looked at Webb. South approach. Ranch road. Get Priest and Reyes. Find it. Find it now. Webb ran. The voice on the phone said, "The east gate, 90 seconds. Get the children through it and into BLM land. That's the only variable I can control from where I am." "Where are you?" Grimm said. "The parking structure you saw on the dashboard feed," the voice said. "I'm looking at a man who knows what I've spent 4 years building toward tonight and is on his phone right now talking to the people coming from the south." A pause that was not informational. That was the pause of someone who has arrived at a point they have been moving toward for a long time and is taking 1 second to register the arrival. "I'm going to go have a conversation with him." "Don't!" Grimm started. The line went dead. He stood in the middle of the compound with a dead phone and 14 minutes on the clock, and children moving in the dark toward an east fence that may or may not have a gate, that may or may not open, and 17 riders coming down a road that led into something they didn't know they were riding into. He looked at the north fence line, at the access road direction, at the darkness beyond the compound lights where the motorcycle sound was now close enough to feel in the sternum as much as hear. He made a decision. He ran to the north fence and he climbed it, chain link bowing under him, wire at the top that he took across the palms rather than navigate around, because there was no time to navigate around it. And he dropped to the other side and he started running up the access road in the dark toward the sound of 17 engines. His knee screamed. He ran through it the way he'd been running through it for 6 years, the way you run through something when the alternative is a child in the back of a truck on a South Ranch road, when the alternative is 17 people riding into a closed frame because Decker trusted the wrong man and Grimm had ridden in the wrong direction. He could see the headlights. Coming around the bend in the access road, the first of them, the column just visible as a chain of light in the dark. He put himself in the middle of the road and he raised both arms. The lead rider slowed. 40 yards. 30. 20. Stopped. The column behind compressed and stopped. The lead rider was a man Grimm had never seen. Mid-40s, road-worn, the cut of a club he didn't know. A patch he could just make out in the headlight scatter, a different design, a different name. He looked at Grimm standing in the access road with blood on both palms from the fence wire and the expression of a man who has run half a mile with a bad knee and arrived with something to say. "You Callahan?" the rider said. "Yeah." "Decker said to follow you." "Then listen," Grimm said. He was breathing hard. His knee was a separate conversation he was not having. "There are 14 armed people coming up a south approach in approximately 9 minutes. The compound behind me has children in it, moving east. The trucks at the entrance behind you are not here to stop you. They're here to close the road after you're in." He let that land. You ride in, the entrance closes, the south approach arrives, and 28 bikers and 43 children are in a box. The lead rider stared at him. "I need 8 riders to stay on this road and make sure those trucks don't move," Grimm said. "I need the other 9 to come with me, south perimeter, right now." He held the man's gaze. "You came here because Decker called. Decker called because we have children in a barn and evidence of something that goes back 17 years and people who want both of those things to disappear tonight." He paused. "That's what you rode into. That's what it is. You can turn around or you can ride with me." The lead rider looked back at his column. He looked at the darkness ahead. He looked at Grimm's bleeding hands. "South perimeter," he said. "How do we get there?" Grimm said, "Follow me." He went back over the fence. His palms were bleeding on the chain link, and he didn't feel it. He dropped into the compound and turned south, and the 9 riders were coming over the fence behind him, one after another, the sound of them landing on the packed earth a percussion line under the work lights, and ahead of him Priest was coming from the south end of the compound at a run. "Ranch road," Priest said. "Found it. Gate in the south fence, padlocked. And Grimm—" He stopped. Grimm looked at him. "There are lights already on that road," Priest said. "They're not 9 minutes out." He looked at the south fence, at the darkness beyond it. At the lights? Yes, he could see them now, moving through the scrub, the parallax of vehicle headlights on unpaved ground, the bouncing quality of it, coming fast. He looked at the children. The last of them were going over the east fence now, Lana's count running in his ear through Teo's radio relay. 39, 40, 41. Almost through, almost clear, almost on BLM land where the frame couldn't close around them. He looked at the 9 riders who had come over the north fence with him. He looked at Priest and Webb and Reyes. He looked at the south fence and the lights behind it and the padlocked gate and the 14 armed people who were not here to arrest anyone and were not here to build a legal case and were not going to stop because he raised his arms in the middle of a road. He reached back and felt the weight of everything. The night, the binders in Carver's arms somewhere east of the fence, the laptop, the ADL7 file, page 41, a name he didn't have yet. The voice on the phone that had gone dead in a parking structure somewhere in a city where a man named Cal Rutherford had been making calls. He reached back and felt all of it. And then he let it go. Everything that wasn't this fence, this gate, this moment, this ground. Bolt cutters, he said. Priest already had them out. The padlock sheared, the gate swung open. And Grim Callahan walked through it into the dark to meet whatever was coming up that road, with 9 strangers and 4 of his own at his back and the sound of 43 children crossing a fence line somewhere behind him, and the pre-rain wind coming hard from the west now, and the lights of the approaching vehicles filling the scrub with a white that was almost beautiful in the way that terrible things sometimes are. And from the north, carried over the whole compound, over the barn and the house and the work lights, and the chain link and the desert in every direction, the sound of the 8 riders he'd left on the access road opening their throttles all at once, a wall of Harley thunder rising into the cold Arizona night like a declaration, like a language, like the specific answer that broken men give when the world asks them one more time whether they're going to look away. The vehicles were 50 yards out, 40. Grim stood in the open gate and did not move. The rain came at 2:47 a.m. It came the way Decker had predicted. Committed, total, the kind of rain that doesn't apologize. And it came in the middle of everything still unresolved, the way weather comes regardless of human timing. And it soaked the caliche and the scrub and the corrugated barn roof and the 14 men who had come up the South Ranch Road and found, in the open gate, something they had not anticipated in any version of their planning. Not one man. 13. Grim and his 9, and Priest and Webb and Reyes, standing in the gate in the rain with the compound lights behind them, and the Harley thunder from the north rolling over everything like weather of its own, and the vehicles 30 yards out with their headlights full on, and nobody moving for 3 seconds that lasted longer than 3 seconds ever should. What happened after that was not clean, and Grim would not describe it as a victory in any sense that the word usually carried. 2 of the 14 made decisions that required physical resolution. One of Grim's borrowed riders took a hit to the shoulder that Teo would spend 40 minutes on later. Reyes went down on the wet caliche and got back up and went down again, and stayed down the second time with his hand pressed to his side and the expression of a man doing arithmetic about how bad the number was. The arithmetic, it turned out, was survivable, but it was a near thing, and the nearness of it lived in Grim's chest for a long time after. What broke it open, what ended it, was not the 13 men in the gate. It was Vasquez. She had called the sheriff. 22 years, she'd said. She had bet on 22 years, and the sheriff had answered, and he was clean, and he had made calls that were clean, and at 2:51 a.m., 3 county units came up the access road from the highway, and the blocking force trucks made a decision about their odds that resulted in 2 drivers face down on wet caliche with their hands behind their backs. The frame closed on the wrong people. By 4 a.m., 52 children were in a county emergency facility in Prescott, warm, accounted for, in the specific bureaucratic care of a system that was imperfect and overextended, and nonetheless showing up, which was sometimes the most that could be said for systems, and was, on this particular morning, enough. The ADL7 file reached the right desk by 6 a.m., through a chain that Vasquez built by hand, contact by contact, each link verified before she added the next. The name on page 41, the architect, the federal shield, the person who had kept 17 years of this running, That name belonged to a man who was in a federal building in Washington, D.C. at 6 a.m. and was not in that building by 7. Cal Rutherford was found in a parking structure in Phoenix at dawn, sitting in his car with his phone in his lap. He had been there since 2 a.m. The voice on the phone, the person who had unlocked the east gate, who had built toward this night for 4 years, who had gone to have a conversation with Rutherford in a parking structure, was a woman named SOS, who had been a DoD contractor in 2009 and had carried what she knew from that year like a stone in her chest for 17 years until she found a way to put it down. She had 2 cracked ribs from the conversation with Rutherford. She would not discuss how she'd gotten them. She gave her full statement to Vasquez at 5 a.m. and did not ask for anything in return except that the children's names be kept out of any public record for as long as the law allowed. Grimm did not know any of this when it happened. He was at the truck stop. They had come back because the truck stop was where the bikes were. And the bikes were where they started, and starting points have a gravity that endings need. They came back in the rain with the gray beginning of dawn moving up from the east and the neon sign above the pump buzzing with the wet. And Cheryl had the lights on and the coffee running and the door open before the first bike turned into the lot. She didn't say anything when they came in. She looked at Reyes on Grimm's arm and at the shoulder on the borrowed rider and at the general condition of 11 people who had ridden into something and ridden out the other side of it, and she moved to the kitchen without comment, and the sounds that came out of it for the next 20 minutes were the sounds of a person doing what they knew how to do. Nadia was still in the corner booth. Her sister was asleep across her lap, finally fully asleep, the profound unconscious weight of a child whose body had decided it was safe enough to let go completely. Nadia herself had not slept. She looked up when Grimm came in, and she looked at him with those eyes, the ones that had looked at him across a burning parking lot what felt like a different century. And she looked at him for a long moment, reading whatever was on his face. He sat down across from her. He didn't say anything for a while. 52, he said finally. One word, a number. She understood the number. He watched it move through her. Not as a statistic, but as something physical, as a thing that had weight and took up space in her chest, and her jaw tightened and her eyes went bright, and she looked down at her sister's sleeping face and pressed her unbandaged hand flat on the table and kept it there until whatever was moving through her had somewhere to go. Then she looked up. The woman on the phone, he said, the one who unlocked the gate. She was in Afghanistan in 2009. He paused. She saw things she should have reported and didn't, because the people above her were the people who needed reporting. She spent 17 years trying to find a way to fix it. He stopped. There's no fixing 17 years, but the name on page 41 won't protect anyone anymore. Nadia looked at him. The blue door, she said. He stared at her. You said it, she said, outside, before you walked to the van. You said it quiet. You thought I didn't hear. He hadn't known he'd said it out loud. She looked at him with those 12-year-old, 60-year-old eyes. You went back, she said. Tonight. You went back to the blue door. His throat was doing something. He let it do what it was doing and didn't try to manage it. Yeah, he said. I went back. She nodded once. Small, final. The nod of someone who has completed a very long calculation and found that the answer, while costly, was the right one. Cheryl put coffee on the table. 2 cups. No commentary. The coffee was still terrible, and Grimm wrapped both hands around the mug and held it, and the heat moved through his palms, over the wire cuts, and he let it. Decker slid into the booth beside him. He didn't say anything either. He looked at Nadia's sister sleeping, and at Nadia, and at his own coffee. His phone was on the table. He'd been on it most of the drive back, building the information chain with Vasquez, a link at a time. Ortega, Grimm said. He didn't know the full shape of it, Decker said. I believe that. I also don't know if believing it changes anything. It doesn't, Grimm said. Not tonight. No, Decker said. Not tonight. They sat with that. Outside, the rain had softened. Not stopped. The Arizona plateau was keeping its commitment, but reduced to the steady, patient kind that settles in for the long portion of the night before dawn and makes everything smell like wet earth and sage and the particular cleanness of water falling on ground that has been dry a long time. The revenants filled the diner by degrees. Carver with the binders and the laptop she'd carried across BLM land in the rain, Delivered now to Vasquez's hands via a handoff that had happened in the parking lot without ceremony. Just the weight of paper and hard drives changing custody, the record of 17 years moving toward the light. Lana at the counter with her third coffee. Webb and Priest in a booth with their eyes half closed but their bodies still arranged toward the door out of pure reflex. Teo at a corner table with his kit open and Reyes beside him, Reyes running his mouth in the way people run their mouths when they've scared themselves and need the sound of their own voice to prove they're still operational. The borrowed riders were outside in the rain, some of them. Others had come in for coffee and were sitting in the spaces between the revenants with the particular ease of people who have shared a thing that makes other categories irrelevant. They didn't know each other. They would probably not ride together again. But for the length of a cup of coffee in a truck stop diner at 5 a.m. in the rain, they were the same thing, which was people who had been somewhere and come back from it and were still deciding what to do with the fact of their own survival. Grim looked up at the window. His Road King was in the lot, wet, the fuel tank dark with rain. He looked at the spot where 3 letters in dried blood had been, where they still were, underneath the rain, the water running over them but not quite washing them away. The dried residue of what Nadia had done holding on in the way that things hold on when they were pressed into a surface with enough intention. SOS. He thought about a compound with a blue door and about a radio call that had said, "Hold position," and about the paperwork after, and about the 17 years between that morning and this one, and about a woman named Solis who had carried a stone in her chest for all of those years and had put it down tonight at the cost of 2 cracked ribs and whatever else the parking structure conversation had cost her that she wasn't going to discuss. He thought about the fact that the stone she'd put down and the stone he'd been carrying were the same stone. He didn't feel lighter. He'd lived long enough to know that the metaphor was wrong about that part, that putting a stone down didn't make you lighter. It just meant you could see your own hands again. That was enough. That was, on most days, more than enough. Nadia's sister shifted in her sleep, made a small sound, resettled against Nadia's side. Nadia put her bandaged hand on the child's shoulder. Automatic. The gesture of someone who has been doing that for a long time and will go on doing it. Grim looked at his coffee. "Where do they go?" he said. Not to Decker, not to anyone specific, just to the room. Cheryl, from behind the counter, said, "There are people, organizations, good ones. I've been looking it up for the last hour." She didn't elaborate on the last hour. She didn't need to. Nadia said, "We have someone. In the city. An aunt." She said it carefully, like she'd been holding the information in reserve, waiting to be sure it was safe to put it on the table. "We have been trying to reach her." "We'll get you to her," Grim said. "You don't have to." "I know," he said. "We will." She looked at him for a moment, then she looked down at her sister, then out the window at the rain and the bikes and the slow gray light moving up from the east. "Grim," she said. "Yeah. It is a strange name." "Yeah," he said. "It is." She almost smiled. The almost of it was enough. He stood up. He put money on the table for the coffee. He rolled his neck once, hearing the vertebrae settle, feeling the accumulated cost of the night in every joint that had been reconstructed or broken or simply used hard for 44 years. He put on his jacket. He went outside. The rain was cold and immediate, and he stood in it for a moment, face up, letting it do what it was doing. His Road King was right there. He walked to it, and he looked at the fuel tank and at the 3 letters still visible under the rain's surface, still legible, still there. He put his thumb against the S, the first letter. He felt the texture of it, the dried, faint irregularity of something that had been written with intention in a moment of absolute need by a 12-year-old girl who had decided to bet everything on a stranger's face. He left it there. He would leave it there. He had decided that without deciding it, it had simply become true at some point in the night, and he was only now catching up to the fact. He would leave it there until weather or time or the ordinary entropy of a machine being ridden hard finally took it. And when that happened, he would know it had happened, and it would mean the same thing. It meant now, which was that some things that are pressed into a surface with enough intention don't need to be preserved to be permanent. Behind him, the diner door opened and the sound of voices and coffee and Reyes still running his mouth and Lana laughing at something. The short, genuine laugh of a person who is surprised by their own capacity for it after a night like this came out into the rain and mixed with the smell of wet sage and exhaust and the far-off clean smell of the desert accepting water. He swung onto the Road King. He didn't start it yet. He just sat on it in the rain and looked at the highway and at the gray morning coming up over the flat desert in the east, the horizon going from black to purple to the specific bruised orange of an Arizona dawn that doesn't care what happened in the dark and is going to be beautiful anyway. Decker came out, stood beside the bike with his coffee, said nothing. One by one, the others filtered out. Some on their bikes, some just standing in the rain, faces up, doing the same thing Grim had done. The borrowed riders on their machines, some of them already pulling out, nodding once as they passed, the nod that doesn't need a word behind it. The diner light was warm in the window. Inside it, a 12-year-old girl and her 8-year-old sister and 49 other children who had spent the night in transit towards something terrible were now, for the length of a cup of soup and a safe room and the company of people who had decided to show up, in the warmest place they'd been in a very long time. Grim started the engine. The Road King turned over with the particular sound it always made, low, deep, the sound of a machine that had been used hard and maintained faithfully and would run until it couldn't, which was the most anyone could ask of anything. The sound of it went out across the wet parking lot and the wet highway and the wet desert in every direction. Decker started his, then Priest, then Lana, then the others, one at a time, the sequence of it building into something larger than the sum of its parts, the way it always did, the way it always would. 11 machines running in the rain outside a truck stop with no name on its sign, on a highway that the world had forgotten about, at the beginning of a morning that was going to ask nothing of them except that they keep going. Grim looked at the fuel tank one last time. He put his hand on the throttle. He rode.